You've all heard stories of what lives in the sewers, right? Of what could possibly survive down there. What could evolve eating up all the chemicals and trash that we throw away? And what could happen if those things started eating us? I'm a high school dropout. Let's get that right out in the open. I dropped out to help with the bills after Dad died when I was 16. My thought process at the time, I wanted to eat and feed my three siblings more than I wanted to learn how to do algebra. I worked a series of progressively terrible jobs in the 4 years that followed. Fast food, retail, day labor. But when a buddy of mine told me the city was hiring maintenance guys, I thought I might be able to do a little better than getting by. Dad had worked maintenance for the county since I was born. Most of them probably still remembered him. He taught me a lot in the 16 years I've had him. Plumbing, general construction, vehicle maintenance, and a little electrical knowledge to name a small amount. I was sure that I could fill the job requirements, but there was one hurdle that I couldn't cross. Applicants had to be a high school graduate or GED holder. I sighed, but I figured I'd call anyway. I have nothing to lose. But as luck would have it, I got Mr. Decker on the phone. Now Mr. Decker was someone I've known since I was tiny. He was as good as my godfather in my parents' eyes. He and Dad had started with the city at the same time, and even after Mr. Decker got promoted, Dad never had any hard feelings about working under him. Dad always said that he was a good leader, and my dad was glad to be his right-hand man when Dad died. Mr. Decker had made sure we had groceries for the first few months and had offered to help in any way he could. He was happy to hear from me, and when he heard about my little problem, he told me to go ahead and fill out an application. He said he'll see what he can do. Well, it was a week later when he finally called me for an interview. "This is just a formality," he said as I sat across from him in his office. "I know what you can do. You're one of the better qualified applicants, if I'm being honest. I want to hire you, but the only thing that's stopping me is that you haven't got your GED." I nodded, thanking him for his time as I got up to leave. He put a hand out to stop me, telling me to let him finish. Wait, have you talked to my boss?" He's talked to his boss, and I think we've come to an agreement. You can work here on a probationary period for the next 6 months. In that 6 months, you have to get your GED. If you can do that, you can keep the job. Sound fair? I nodded, relief washing over me. It did sound fair. When I shook his hand, he told me he was glad to welcome me aboard. And the job was a dream. I was still living at home with Mom and my siblings that were too young to work. The pay from the city would get us out of some debt that we were very worried about. Mom was ecstatic when she heard about the job. She was close to sobbing when I told her I was going to use the pay to help her out more. I started researching how I could take my GED test right away. Surprisingly, there were study guides and practice tests online, but it did make me realize how many gaps there were in my knowledge. I needed to study, but I had work to think about too. Eventually, I settled into a pretty comfortable routine of working during the day and studying after I got off at 6. The work, I quickly found out, was something I was really good at. I was working with another of Dad's old friends, a guy named Nolan. Nolan was looking forward to retirement and told me he had great faith in me passing the test. But what Mr. Decker hadn't told me that Nolan's position was in the city sewer system. Or, as Nolan called it, the understench. It's like a whole other world down there, kid. You have to be careful, but I think you'll do just fine. Just remember to follow the rules, and you'll be just fine. So Nolan had rules for when you were in the understench, and you had better follow them, or he'd let you know about it. Rule 1 was easy. Always wear your industrial boots when in the sewer. There's stuff down there you don't want on your shoes, kid. The state provides you boots, so wear them, alright? Rule 2 was to always bring a light. I don't care if you leave your whole 2 belts in the car. If you're in the understench, you better have a light. The sewers in this town, they're old. Some parts date back to the early 1900s. The deeper you get, the darker it goes. I suggest you get a headlamp like this one, he said, pointing at his as he nearly blinded me with it. But, any kind of light will do. I don't care if you flick your back, just have a light when you go into the sewer. You hear me? And that was where the rules got a little weird. Rule 3. Always listen for the scraping. It was about 3 days into my first week. Nolan and I were down in the sewers checking walls for straying. But first, I should probably explain the sewers in my town. The town's sewer system is a hodgepodge of new and old masonry. There are parts of the sewer where a 7-foot tall person could stand upright comfortably, and other places where Nolan and I had to crawl to get through. The city had built the new sewers right on top of the old ones. In some places, the old parts had begun to collapse and take the newer sections with them. That was what we were looking for. Nolan had a system that would take him on a complete circuit of the sewers once every 2 weeks. We were moving through one of the old systems. We were crouching as we used our headlamps to check for cracks and soft areas. And that was when I saw markings on the concrete. They looked like fingernail marks, as if something had dragged its nails across it. When I asked Nolan about them, he told me we would talk about it once we got topside. I wanted to tell him to just go ahead and spill it, but he put up a hand before I could speak. There was something in the tunnel ahead. It sounded like something being dragged over the concrete, something that sounded like fingernails this way. Nolan half whispered. He led me down another tunnel away from the scraping sound, and I want to say that what happened next was all in my head. But for a second there, I thought I heard the scraping move faster as we hurried away from it. It was only a few minutes later that we surfaced near the old theater on 4th and Lex. We'll get some lunch first and come back later, he said. It should be gone by then. What should I do? I asked as he put the cap back on the manhole and headed for a bistro nearby. When you've been crawling through a sewer all day, your choices always seem to be outdoor eating or drive-through. I don't know, Nolan said as we took a seat on the patio. I've never seen it, and neither had the guy before me. He said the scraping is a sound that's best avoided, and I always have. It leaves behind the scrape marks, the long lines on the concrete that you saw. My old mentor also said that whatever it is, it also leaves the tunnels a little cleaner. Well, after he told me that, I was always careful to listen for the scraping. But even with that, I almost became comfortable down in the dark tunnels beneath the city after only a few weeks on the job. You never quite got used to the smell, but you could come to terms with it. I started using a respirator that I wore when in the sewer, got a few pairs of water-resistant jumpsuits, and upgraded my boots to something a little more durable. By the end of the first month, Nolan was pretty impressed with my progress. But I still hadn't learned all the secrets of the understench, like Rule 4, which was a pretty important one. We were rooting through the tunnels, looking for damage one day. Suddenly, Nolan stuck a hand out and caught me before I could fall into a pit. My lamp hadn't illuminated the spot properly, and no one of the holes seemed to be oozing some kind of moving sludge. It was midnight black, and the longer I watched it, the more sure I was that it was jiggling. The light of my headlamp never penetrated it, and as it wiggled, I felt the sudden urge to touch it. I had my hand reaching out before I even realized what I was doing. I know, Nolan said, keeping his arm across my chest. But don't get near it. It lures you in, and nobody knows what happens after that. Best not to tempt fate, he said. We skirted around the black goo, making sure I wasn't looking at it for too long. I began to realize how lucky I'd been the more of them I saw in the dark passages. I asked Nolan about them, and he said they'd been down here for as long as he could remember. His old mentor had actually lost a hand to one when he fell against a puddle of it. His hand just slipped right in, and if I hadn't caught him before he fell in, he probably would have lost a lot more than a hand, he said. It took his whole hand, I asked, not quite sure I believed it. Yep, to the wrist. The wound was clean, like the hand had never been there at all. He told the bosses that something in the water had gotten a hold of him, but I think they knew. He retired not long after, and I was more careful after his loss. So that was Rule 4. Avoid the black puddles. Nolan only had 5 rules, it seemed. But the 5th was the one he valued the most. We didn't climb down holes that led into the old sewers, and we didn't go any deeper than 2 floors past ST level. I was halfway through my second month when we came across a big hole that went past the usual depth. It spiraled into the earth like a gaping maw. I haven't seen anything like it before. So I started hooking up a rope to investigate when Nolan shook his head at me. He was radioing for a mixer truck, the kind we use for patchwork. He glanced down at the hole and told him to make it double. "We'll fix it no matter how deep it goes, and proceed on," he told me as he hooked the radio back on his belt. I nodded, but Nolan wasn't finished teaching just yet. "We don't go into those holes, not into the old section. There's dangerous stuff down there, and if you get lost, then you might not ever find the light again," he said. We didn't have to wait long before the truck pulled up to the nearest manhole. We dragged the fill hose down and let it down the tunnels until we were back at the pit. It hung over the edge as we pumped it full of concrete. It took a while, too. It was a really deep hole, deeper than I would have thought. But eventually, we did fill it up until it was level with the floor. We tugged on the nozzles to let them know to pull them up. We then set up some cones around the area until it dries. And we moved on, our round only half done. But I now knew better than to climb in holes that went too deep. Nolan's lessons, however, would soon come to an end. I got to work one morning when Mr. Decker called me into his office. It had only been 3 months since I was hired, and I was worried that I might have done something wrong. I was scheduled to take my GED test at the end of the month, and I was pretty confident I was going to pass. I was looking forward to coming off probation early, but if I'd messed something up, then I could kiss that goodbye. Mr. Decker looked worried. When I asked what I'd done, he said it wasn't me. It was Nolan. Well, Nolan's sick, kid. Not like regular sickness either. He's got some super aggressive strain of pneumonia. And he's probably going to be out for a few weeks, he said. I was speechless. I wondered if this was something that would force Nolan to retire early, but Mr. Decker assured me he'll be back soon. Nolan's had trouble with his lungs on and off since he turned 45. It's just something he's had to learn to deal with. But the good news is, he said, the doctors have put him on 2 weeks of bed rest and a hefty dose of steroids. So my question is, do you feel like you can do Nolan's job while he's out? I thought about it, not wanting to bite off more than I could chew. I remembered Nolan's rules. As long as I follow them, he said, I'll be fine. So I finally nodded my head. I believed I could. Mr. Decker was glad to hear it. He told me that once I passed my GED, I would be Nolan's apprentice until he retired. And then he promised I would be the man for sewer repairs for the department. And that excited me. What he was saying would essentially make me a department head, and that probably meant a pay raise and a boost in benefits. I set off that day with high hopes. The first couple of days were business as usual. I did hear the scraping once or twice, but I didn't see the dark sludge or any deep holes. I always carried my light, and I always wore my proper footwear when I was in the understench. I was careful, aware of how it was just me down there now. But for a little while, it was okay. It was Friday, the 5th day of me being alone under the city. I got a call about a potential clog in one of the lines. I sighed and I went down to see what I was dealing with. I knew the good times just couldn't last. Unplugging a clog is my least favorite thing about the job. Depending on the clog, it could take hours to get it out. The whole time, standing next to an unholy stinking mass of waste oil and debris, I grabbed the pole we kept in the back of the truck for these situations. We like to call it the harpoon. Well, turns out it was a bunch of debris from a storm the night before. That happened a lot. You never knew what was going to wash into the sewers, but as I got into position with my pole, I felt something that had me worried. The ground I had been standing on gave a loud, creaking groan, and I wondered if it would hold. I tested the ground a bit more, making sure it wouldn't crumble under me. Like I said, holes aren't uncommon with how old these sewers are. I stomped my boots a few times until I was satisfied it'd be okay. After that, I turned my attention to trying to unclog the blockage. It appeared to be an old tarp that had gotten wrapped in something. The work wasn't easy. I would work something loose, only to feel it get stuck in the remains of the tarp. I was sweating. My work shirt was just sticking to me, and as I worked the blockage loose, I didn't like the way the ground shifted beneath me. I considered moving, but that was when I felt some of the tarp rip loose and drift farther off. I chopped at it with the sharp end of the harpoon, and as it began to break up, I was happy with progress. It started floating away in pieces, the remains catching in the current. And that was when I felt my left foot fall through the floor. I was falling before I ever knew it. And when I landed, I whacked my head on the concrete and blacked out. When I woke up, I was in complete darkness. There was no light anywhere. The hole I'd fallen in through had to be somewhere above me, but I couldn't begin to tell you where I was. I fumbled around for my flashlight in the dark, and all the while, I could hear the loud and aggressive skitter of nails across concrete. It was closer than I'd ever heard it, and I was terrified that I might finally get a look at what made that noise. The idea of what might lie at the other end of those nails wasn't something I wanted to imagine, and it was getting closer, louder. I wanted to run, but I needed a light. When I finally found the flashlight, my hands were shaking badly enough. I almost couldn't switch it on, and what it revealed, it didn't really make me feel any better. I was in a pit of some kind. The tunnels were made of earth instead of concrete. I pointed the light up, but the opening looked more like a tunnel instead of a hole. I had fallen through the floor and down some sort of chute, like Alice down a rabbit hole. And now I was in some sort of underground chamber. Suddenly, Nolan telling me not to climb into holes I couldn't see the bottom of, it made a lot more sense. I reached for my phone to call for help. Service would be hit or miss down here, but apparently it wasn't going to be an issue. The phone I pulled out was broken in half. I slid it back into my pocket, losing hope. I swept the flashlight around and spotted a single tunnel heading deeper into the earth. I didn't have much of a choice. The tunnel was about 7 feet high, but it was barely wide enough for me to move comfortably. I had to flatten my body against the walls and shimmy through in some parts. I wondered how it had been made or what they were for. As I looked closer at the walls, I saw something familiar. The dirt walls had long scratches along the sides, like nails that had scraped along behind whatever had dug the tunnel. I could hear that scraping now, though it seemed to be getting further away. The farther I went, the more nervous I was that the flashlight would fail me and I'd be in the dark. It had a 12-hour charge on it, and I'd only used it for a few hours the day before. I wished I had thought to wear my headlamp, but it was sitting in my truck the whole time. I could still hear that damn scratching noise. The longer I'm down here, the harder it becomes to know where it was coming from. Sometimes I was sure it was coming from behind me. Other times, it seemed like it was just ahead of me in the darkness. And one time, I don't know how, but it sounded like it was coming from inside the wall next to me. I told myself it was just acoustics, that the sound was bouncing weirdly off the walls as they pressed close against me. I told myself I was just working myself up. I tried to control my breathing. I couldn't take big gulps of air anymore as the walls pressed against me, but I still had to keep moving. So I inched my way forward, trying my damnedest to ignore the scratching. Eventually, I stumbled out of the tunnel, falling through to a chamber. In front of me was a crossroads. There were paths going right, left, and straight ahead. I listened, trying to pick out where the scraping noise was coming from. I decided on the tunnel right in front of me. I had taken only a single step when I heard a second scraping sound coming from the left. It was loud, a little louder than the one I was hearing before. I hung back in the tunnel I'd just come out of to get a look at whatever was making the noise. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I wanted to know what I was up against if I had to find my way out. Hunkered against that dirt wall, the harpoon clutched tight in my hand. I thought I was ready for anything. But as whatever it was scratched its way from the next tunnel, I saw that I was not remotely prepared for what made these burrows. I peeked out, almost dropping my harpoon. The creature was long and tall, almost too big to fit in the tunnel. It dragged itself along on several long arms tipped with chipped and jagged nails. It was pale, the color of bleached flesh. Its body was wrinkled and dirty, with a huge mouth at one end. The mouth was open like a demented sea monster. The jagged teeth were full of grit and mud. It had a small, sharp nose and a pair of beady eyes like a mole. But what sickened me the most was the way it moved. Its body deflated like a balloon as it squeezed through. The creature would twist, moving its nails, teeth, muscles around as it moved. It took several minutes for it to make its way completely through the passage. The sides of its body had smaller arms that helped it crawl along. They too had jagged, dirty nails at their tips, and as it passed through the crossroads, I saw it pause just long enough to leave a small puddle of a familiar dark liquid. It was the stuff we'd been finding in the sewers. And as the monster finally passed, I went over and took a closer look at the black puddle. As I watched it in the beam of my light, I could already see it moving outward, drinking up the dirt as it spread out. I thought back to Nolan's story of how it swallowed up a man's hand. I shuddered. Before ducking through the tunnel I'd wanted to enter, wishing that I'd never seen that thing. I followed the tunnel, hearing the scraping nails as I moved through. I found myself hoping that I would never encounter what made those sounds. I came out to more chambers, more crossroads, more burrows made by those things. I found more of the dark puddles, and I tried my best to avoid them, but some of them were huge. The way they grew, it made me think they were alive somehow, as weird as that sounds. And then as I rounded a corner, I felt my feet slip a little. I reached out to brace myself against the wall, but I found nothing. I put my harpoon on the ground, and thankfully it held. Because as I looked down, I saw what I had stopped myself from falling into. My flashlight showed me a drop that would have killed me. The huge cavern below was lit with these small fluorescent mushrooms, giving me a glimpse of the things that squirmed under me. The creature I had seen before. It was a small one, the things below. They were huge, 12/16/20 feet high, I think, and as they moved, they would sometimes run into one another, their sharp claws ripping skin and taking off huge chunks of flesh. I counted 10, then 20, then more than 50 of them in that pit. I quietly kept following the tunnel. Very happy I still had my flashlight, and when I saw a side passage that sloped upward, I was so happy I threw my fist in the air. That had to be one of their burrows they used to get in the sewers. As I followed it up, the dirt became less muddy and more coarse. When bricks began to line the walls, I breathed a huge sigh of relief. And when I came out into the sewer and I found a ladder leading to the surface, I was so happy to feel light on my face. I found I was 12 blocks from the county office. As I entered, Mr. Decker's secretary jumped at the side of me. She said that Mr. Decker had a group of guys down in the sewers looking for me. I've been missing for hours and they couldn't reach me by phone. They were worried I got hurt or worse down there. I held up the remains of my phone and explained what had happened. She called Mr. Decker, who sounded very relieved I'd been found. He and about 10 guys from the office came out of the sewers a few minutes later. He offered to take me to the hospital. I told him I was fine, but I did want to go to the hospital. I wanted to visit Nolan. He'd been placed in the short stay wing after running a fever a few days before. Mr. Decker nodded as he led me to his car. You look like you might need a bath first, too. You're a mess, son, he said sympathetically. Not long after, I was sitting in a chair beside Nolan's bed, explaining to him and Mr. Decker what I'd seen. Decker looked at Nolan, but the old man only shrugged. If the kid says that's what he saw, then I believe him. He's got no reason to lie about it. It explains a lot of weirdness down the tunnels. I guess in this case we can forgive the rule about not climbing in the holes too deep, Nolan said with a wink. Nolan came back a week and a half later. I was glad for the company after 2.5 weeks of being alone down there. A few weeks after that, I came to work with my GED, now officially a high school graduate. They took me out to celebrate that night, and after all the pizza and beer, Nolan told me that he was proud of me. It would be a pain to teach another new guy the rules, he said with a laugh. So yeah, I still took the job. I still go down in the sewers. The money was too good to pass up. But now I'm more careful to look out for soft spots. And I never forget the rules. I have never seen one of those creatures again since that day in the deep tunnels. And I hope I never do. Never play the up-down game. I never thought my career would hit rock bottom like this. I used to be a great reporter, the kind who would deal with mob bosses and dirty politicians. But here I was, chasing a ghost story. Teenagers call it the up-down game. It sounded more like a failed reality show than an urban legend. But whatever it was, it made kids break into this building to play it. So I was going to interview the owner about what made his elevators so damn special. I parked my beat-up Honda in front of Darling Dealers. The place looked so old and neglected, it could have starred in a horror movie all by itself. Graffiti covered the walls, and a lot of the windows were smashed up. I adjusted my tie out of habit. It was a cheap silk number that screamed. Not that Darling or his spooky elevator cared what I wore, but old habits die hard. Appearances were everything when I was at the top of the investigative food chain. They still should be if anyone cared about real journalism anymore. The building lobby was noticeably colder. Musty air clung to my clothes. It smelled like dust and despair. Probably like the stupid kids who snuck in here for their cheap thrills. Mr. Darling met me in the lobby on the first floor. He was a thin man with a wary smile. Mr. Lewis, I presume. He said. Yep, that's me, Artie Lewis, I replied. Thanks for meeting me on such short notice. Of course, he nodded, leading me towards the elevator. It's this way. I must admit, it's unusual to get interest from the press about the Up-Down game. Usually, it's just local kids looking for a scare. The elevator in question looked ordinary enough. Sure, it looked new, but it certainly didn't look special. How these kids think the elevator's haunted, I asked. Something like that, he began. They say if you press the up button 4 times, you enter another world. But the real kicker lies during the game. And it kills you. How kills you? Really, I said. I hated everything about this already. Yes, that's the legend. Teenagers have been sneaking in for years to try it out. We've had a few incidents. Nothing deadly, mind you, but enough to keep the story alive. And the questions. What about those? I asked, referring to the game rules I read online. Ah, yes. Well, the game asks you true or false questions. You answer by pressing either up for true or down for false. Simple enough, right? But they say the elevator knows when you're lying. I leaned against the metal doors and folded my arms. Well, there's only 4 floors in this building, including this one, I began. And no basement. So what happens if I press up 4 times? Mr. Darling's eyes darted away for a second. Then I suppose you'll find out, won't you? Yes. And one more detail. The game must be played at night. It doesn't work otherwise. It's why I asked you to come over at this hour. Yeah, of course, right? It's got to be played at night, because spooky things only happen in the dark, right? I said. Dear God, I hated my job. Mr. Darling pulled out a set of keys and tossed them to me. Here, lock up when you're done. You can bring them back in the morning. Now, I had a feeling the old man wasn't telling me everything, but I wasn't going to ask more questions. This story was already taking up enough of my time. The sun was setting. The light cast long shadows through the cracked windows. I watched as Mr. Darling waved goodbye before disappearing through the entrance doors. It was so quiet here. I could hear the building pipes groan in the background. I looked around the lobby. The place was a dump. Rotting carpets under my shoes smelled like mildew. Every step I took kicked up a cloud of dust. The walls were bare, stripped of anything that had value. It was clear why the local teens chose this spot for their ghost hunting games. There was something strange, though. What really stood out to me? It was the elevator. Unlike everything else around it, the elevator looked brand new. The steel doors were so shiny that I could see my reflection. It made me wonder why he kept this elevator looking so good. Even though the rest of the place was falling apart, I pulled out my notebook, flipping through recent police reports about this place, mostly break-ins and other wild stunts teenagers would do. I sighed. My job used to be more than chasing urban legends like this. Back in the day, I was all about reporting corruption scandals. The things that truly mattered to society. This case about kids sneaking around in a haunted elevator seemed pretty minor in comparison, but I couldn't help but do my homework. Old habits die hard. I spent the day going through police reports to dig up anything I could find on this elevator. Trespassing cases dated back as far as 10 years ago. Started right around the time Darling dealers closed up shop here and moved downtown. From what I read, a break-in would happen every couple months or so. Most of them were standard stuff. Some kids got busted for underage drinking, things like that. But some cases did stick out to me. One report claimed that a boy had been trapped in the elevator for 3 days. Another, it was about a missing girl who was found in the elevator, but with no memory of how she got there. And there were at least a few disappearances connected to this place. Back in 2004, two brothers went missing. Their last known location was this building. The police conducted a search, but all they found was a sweater and a few fingerprints. The break-in stopped for a year after that. It started up again when a whole gang of kids got busted for vandalism. The report said they were spray painting the elevator doors. I looked up and I saw my reflection staring back at me. The doors were polished to a shine, not a stain anywhere. Kids, how they don't have enough to do. That's why they were all out there, making up stories to scare each other or make themselves sound cooler than they actually were. If you ask me, kids these days need a hobby or a job. You know, we've got a world full of liars out there. Sometimes, sure, they're necessary. You got to sprinkle in something extra to make a news story click. You got to get people's attention. Get them to care about it all. But these kids, all they were doing was wasting people's time. And right now, worse, they were wasting my time. So the faster I played this stupid game, the faster I could get home. I figured I'd snap a few photos of the elevator for the article. More out of habit than anything, I pulled out my phone, and I aimed it at the steel doors. I tapped the screen to capture the image. The first photo. It showed the elevator clearly enough, but my reflection ruined it. Great, I muttered. I deleted the photo, but just as it disappeared, I caught a glimpse of something else. It looked like another reflection on the other door, and it wasn't mine. Probably just a glitch. Cheap piece of crap. I couldn't always afford to upgrade my phone. I took another photo from a different angle. This time a big flash appeared right in the middle, completely covering up the elevator. I didn't even have my flash on, so I tried again, aiming carefully before pressing the button, but nothing happened. My phone just refused to take another shot. No matter how many times I tapped, the camera wouldn't go. I pressed the button so hard I almost broke my screen. Fed up, I shoved the phone back into my pocket. Forget it, I said to the empty lobby. Maybe it was the universe telling me something. But I was not in the mood to listen. With nothing else to do, I pressed the button on the elevator. It glowed blue before the door dinged open. Alright, it was time to see what this elevator game was really about. Photos or no photos. I stepped inside and I was taken aback at how nice it was, especially for a building that had been abandoned for who knows how long. It was this old school kind of fancy. The floor was covered in a deep red carpet. There was a faint smell of nicotine and perfume in the air. The walls had gold-framed mirrors that made the space feel bigger than it was. Under the mirrors was carved with paneling that reached the floor. I knocked on one, and I realized it was solid oak. This was the kind of elevator a mob boss would have. I would know. I've seen him. The entire thing sparkled and shined thanks to the yellow light from above. Next to the door was the panel. It had a modern-looking LCD screen. It was completely out of place in the middle of all the fancy decorations. I looked over it and I saw there were 4 buttons. One for each floor of the building, just like he said, of course. But then there were 2 extra buttons with arrows pointing up and down. Now that I thought about it, it was weird to have something like that in an elevator. Who want to go 1 floor at a time? I stood still, unsure of what was supposed to happen next. After a few seconds of silence, a soft ding echoed through the small space. The door slid shut with a gentle whoosh. My eyes shifted to the LCD screen where a message appeared. It blinked in a plain digital font. "Ready to play?" it read. I shrugged. I pressed the up button, and I felt the elevator lurch gently. It began to move slowly upwards, but I noticed that none of the buttons lit up to tell me what floor I was on. I figured this was the reason why people thought it was a portal to another world or whatever. Typical. A broken light turned into a ghost story. The elevator stopped, but the doors remained closed. The LCD screen flickered to life with another question. "Is your name Artie Lewis?" I pressed the up button without a second thought. Just 2 more times, I told myself. The elevator moved again, going up to the third floor. The moment it stopped, another message was on screen. Were you once a respected investigative journalist? My teeth clenched. I pressed the up button harder than I meant to. This had to be a joke. Mr. Darling was messing with me. That asshole was probably typing the messages and watching me through a hidden camera. This entire thing was a joke. I scanned the polished walls of the elevator. This isn't funny, darling, I said. Just one more button and I could get out of this stupid game. I'd write the whole damn article in 30 minutes and I'd have a beer. The elevator started up again, and soon it came to an abrupt stop. I figured we had to be on the fourth floor now. If the stories were real, answering the truth on the next one would take me to another world. But I wasn't here to find that. I just wanted to finish this shit. The next question came up on screen. Was Mr. Is Oliver real? It read. Without hesitating, I hit the up button for true. Instantly, the elevator started shaking. The mirrors on the walls rattled in their frames. The lights overhead flickered wildly. It was like an earthquake. A loud grinding and tearing sound filled my ears. The floor seemed to drop from under me. My stomach lurched with a free fall, and then everything stopped and I fell to the floor. I lay there for a moment dazed. Did a cable just break? I groaned in pain and I pushed myself up to look at the screen again. It displayed a new message. 2 lies left, it read. I looked for any hidden cameras. It's called an alias, darling. It was to protect the whistleblower, I said. But how the hell would he know something like that? Mr. Oliver was a source I used for an article, some embezzlement scandal at the school board. It was one of those fancy colleges where the parents could bribe their way in. This was my first big story, but the problem was my actual lead chickened out last minute. Without him, I had nothing. So I made up Mr. Oliver, who saw the treasurer messing with the funds. Hey, it was technically the truth. I never wrote anything the source himself wouldn't have said, and in the end, the treasurer was found to be skimming money to fund her next cruise. It all worked out. I looked up at the screen and I saw a new question appeared. Do you enjoy your current job? It read. You gotta be kidding me. Okay, enough is enough. I pulled out my phone and tried to call for help, but of course there was no signal. I jabbed at the other elevator buttons to open the doors, but nothing happened. There wasn't even a way to climb out. The ceiling was sealed tight. No escape hatch. Hey, darling, let me out. You want a kidnapping charge. I says I kicked the door. Then suddenly the sound of shattering glass exploded behind me. Shards flew through the air, a long piece slicing my cheek. I put my hand up to my face and I felt blood. That son of a bitch, I spun around to check out the damage, but then I stopped the mirror. It was perfectly intact. No cracks, no signs of damage. In fact, every single one was fine, but broken shards were everywhere. I moved closer to the back mirror. There was something wrong with my reflection. I touched my face. I could feel the cut. It was much deeper than I thought, but my reflection didn't have one. The skin looked completely smooth. Behind me, I saw another question. It looked like there was only one way out of here. I needed to keep playing this messed up game. I decided that once I was out, I would have this whole place condemned. I hit the down button to answer the question. No, I didn't like my job. Who the hell would? And right away, the elevator moved back to the second floor. But this ride was anything but smooth. The whole thing shook violently. It groaned like it was falling apart. The noises were so bad, it sounded like it was barely holding together. The next question popped up on screen. Have you always reported the truth? It asked. I scoffed and I hit the up button for true. That was my whole job. Or at least it used to be. Almost instantly, a horrifying sound filled the space, a tearing noise. That sounded like cords snapping apart. The elevator shuddered and it lurched to one side, throwing me off balance. I slammed against one of the wooden panels. Pain exploded on my shoulder. I reached up and I felt a thick splinter stuck in my skin. It was about 3 inches long. I had no idea where it came from. but it was made of the same polished oak as the wooden paneling. I grit my teeth and I pulled it out. Blood started to stain my shirt. I looked up, furious, and I saw that the panel had a new message. On my left, it said, "I've always reported the truth," I yelled out. The details didn't matter. They never did. But the stories, in essence, were always true. The little things, they shouldn't matter. So what if some quotes were fudged or I named the wrong source? Who cares? The truth still got out in the end, and it wouldn't have happened if it weren't for me breaking a story. I did everyone a service. You're welcome. I tried to steady my breathing. In the background, I could hear the elevator groan beneath my weight. I needed to get out of here. I looked around for something to force the doors open, and that's when I saw something was wrong with the mirrors. It was subtle at first. The reflections in them looked wavy, like looking through water, and then they started warping. I could see my face drooping and twisting. It took me a second to realize what was happening. The mirrors, it was like they were melting. The glass sagged like candle wax. I reached out to touch one. It was hard and solid, like how it should be. It still dripped down the oak panels like ice cream on a hot day. I stepped back and I felt something sharp poking me. I turned around and I saw another wooden splinter about half a foot long, sticking out of a panel. And I don't mean a piece had broken off. No, this one. It looked like it was made to be like that, like it had always been there. I ran my hand along the panel. There were sharp little bumps everywhere. If I kept my hand in one spot, I could actually feel the spikes growing through the wood. This wasn't Mr. Darling. There was no way he could be doing this. I looked back up at the screen as a new message came. "Did you endanger Officer Nelson's life?" It read. He was safe as far as I knew. He was in witness protection. My finger hovered over the down button. Officer Nelson had been my main lead on a story about a major drug bust. He was deep undercover with a local gang, the kind he wouldn't want to cross. I was the first to report on it when the raid happened. It was some of my best work. I had the whole thing written around Officer Nelson going undercover. Figured it was a good way to make the story more compelling. You know, a story about a real-life hero. People love that sort of thing. I didn't mention Officer Nelson by name, of course, but the gang knew they had a rat. As soon as the paper hit the streets, they figured out pretty quickly who it was. Threats started pouring in, and he became a target. Him and his family had to go into witness protection. I thought about it before pressing the up button. The elevator jerked up to the second floor. I could hear the machinery struggle. The whole thing shook violently. I'd end up skewered on one of the spikes if I wasn't careful. There were more of them in the walls now. Each point was as sharp as a knife. The next question came up. "Did you know the cure was fake?" It read. That was a story I wrote years ago. Cure-All. It was supposed to be a game changer, a miracle pill that could cure arthritis in the elderly. That was what the manufacturer told me. Anyway, when I got hold of the scoop, I didn't hesitate. I wrote it up using the company's own reports, fact-checking. It seemed unnecessary at the time. I knew the story was going to be a hit. The pill hit the market, and thanks to my article, people everywhere rushed to buy it. But it wasn't long before the truth came out. The drug wasn't the miracle it was made out to be. Not only did it fail to deliver on its promises, but it made arthritis much worse for a lot of people. The drug was finally recalled when an old lady died from a seizure. I told myself I was just the messenger. I reported what the manufacturer told me. How was I supposed to know they were faking these results? But even before the article went to print, I did have my doubts. Any good reporters? We have a finely tuned bullshit detector, and mine was going off as soon as I met with a pharma rep. Even as I read their clinical reports, some things just didn't add up. The graphs were off, and the trials did seem rushed, and the testimonials, they felt a bit too perfect, but the story was too good to pass up. I had no choice but to take it. I mean, who wouldn't? I pressed the up button. Yeah, I guess you could say I knew it wasn't a miracle drug, but what happens after a story gets printed shouldn't be on me. The elevator lurched upward. All right, just 2 more times and I was out. The ride was jerky, the cabin shuddering with every inch climbed. I reached out to steady myself and I felt something cut into me, and I pulled my hand back. Blood oozed from my palm. The wooden spikes were getting longer. It was like being in one of those medieval torture devices. What is it called? The Iron Maiden, where they locked you in a coffin full of nails. I could barely move without brushing against one. And then I noticed how small the space was. Not just because of the spikes, but I felt like the walls were closing in. I stood still and I focused on a single wall. It was slow, but there was no doubt about it. The elevator was shrinking inch by inch, and yet I could hear the cabin scrape against the shaft outside as it moved upwards. I braced myself against the door as the elevator tossed me around. It was the only place that didn't have anything growing out of it. Finally, the whole thing stopped as we reached the next floor. A new question popped up. Was Robert Silva innocent? It read. Without hesitation, I pressed the up button. True. Robert Silva was the center of my most controversial story. He was a school teacher, and he knew all the victims in a series of disappearances that shook the city. The public was furious when the first body turned up. They wanted answers that the police didn't have, so I did a little investigating on my own. And I landed on Silva. My police contact said they thought he was a person of interest. So I jumped the gun. I published the article. I laid out the few bits of evidence I had. I made connections and assumptions that sounded right at the time. I swear they made sense back then. The consequences were immediate. Robert Silva was fired, and his house kept getting vandalized. He moved out of state when someone left a pig head on his doorstep. The police caught the real killer eventually, but Silva never got his job back, and I lost mine. The elevator gave a sudden, rough jerk upwards. I braced myself against the metal doors. They were the only thing not covered in wooden spikes. But as I leaned back, I could feel the doors changing. The texture shifted under my palms. It started to feel less metal, more wood, polished and smooth. I turned around and I watched as the doors disappeared under the same wood paneling. I slammed a fist against what was left of them. What more did this game want from me? I was pressing the up buttons. I was telling the truth. Whatever happens after a story gets out, it's not on me. None of it was my fault. The walls of the elevator continued to close in. The space grew tighter by the second. I couldn't even move my feet anymore without a sharp spike jabbing into me on either side of me. I could see shiny puddles on the carpet as the mirrors continued to melt. I could barely feel the doors anymore. Above me, the lights turned up bright. The bulbs made a high-pitched whirring noise, like they were about to explode. They never did, though. The lights just kept getting brighter and brighter until it was blinding. I squinted and shielded my eyes. Through the glare, I struggled to read the final question. Are you a bad person? It read. Are you a bad person? The question bounced around my head. I thought back to all those people, Robert Silva and Officer Nelson, the cure-all victims. I ruined their lives, and they weren't the only ones I screwed over. I knew that. I'd always known that. The light above me, it was now so bright I couldn't keep my eyes open. It seared through my eyelids. My head was pounding from the pain. I could feel my arm getting cut as I brushed against the spikes. I thought about my life again. I was so tired of lying. With a deep breath, I pushed the up button. I heard a loud ding and a soft whoosh, the familiar sound of elevator doors sliding open. I blinked away the glare of the lights, and I looked around. Everything had changed. I was in a plain office elevator. It was old and dingy. The fancy decor was gone. No more framed mirrors or red carpet. There weren't any wood panels or gold mirrors. Now I was standing on a floor made of dirty, cracked tiles. The walls were just bare metal, and the mirrors were stained and blurry. I stepped out onto the first floor of Darling Dealers. Morning sunlight hit my face. It was the lobby I was in last night. I could see a clock on the wall. It was almost 7 a.m. Behind me, I could hear the elevator doors closing. I looked back one last time. I saw my reflection, covered in cuts and bruises, and it smiled, raised a hand, and and waved goodbye. I had never seen myself that happy. When I first got the job, they didn't tell me anything strange about the night shift. No one pulled me aside with a wink and a warning. No old-timer whispered ghost stories by the coffee pot. It was a small town, population 4,000 on a good day, and the most excitement anyone expected was a rowdy football game or a call from Mrs. Turner about her stolen mail again. The most unsettling thing, I figured, would be the silence, the quiet, hollow kind of dark that hangs over towns like ours after midnight. The chief met me on my first night, a tall guy with tired eyes and graying hair. He shook my hand firmly, his grip lingering a second too long. "You read the rules I left on your desk?" he asked. I nodded, but I hadn't. I glanced at the papers before stuffing it into my pocket, assuming they were standard shift protocols, reminders to lock up the station or fill out my logs. He didn't need to know that, though, and he seemed satisfied enough, giving me a stiff nod before sending me out on patrol. Only then, sitting in the cruiser under the dim light in the station lot, did I take the paper out again. In plain blocky handwriting, 6 rules stared back at me. Rule number 1. Stay in your car between midnight and 3:33 a.m. Do not leave for any reason. Lock the doors. Number 2. If you see a pair of headlights coming towards you after 2 a.m., turn off your lights, put the car in park, and keep your head down until they pass. Number 3. If you hear someone tapping on the window, ignore it, even if they call your name. Number 4. Around 3 a.m., you might see someone in the rearview mirror. Do not look directly at them. Keep your focus straight ahead until they're gone. Number 5. There may be a patrol car that looks like ours, but the numbers will be all wrong. Do not acknowledge it, and do not get out of your car if it pulls up beside you. And rule number 6. Never answer your radio after 3:33 a.m. If you hear any voices, turn it off. Don't turn it back on until sunrise. I frowned. All right, this was some kind of initiation job. Maybe that chief got a kick out of Hayes and the new guy. You know, it felt stupid, but there was an uneasiness that sat heavy in my stomach as I reread each rule, trying to rationalize them, trying to find some angle that made sense. When midnight rolls around, I found myself in the parking lot of an old gas station that hadn't been in business for years. I cut the engine, leaned back in the seat, and tried to settle in. The night air outside was dead still. No hum of life or distant traffic, just an almost oppressive silence. For the first half hour, I thumbed through my phone, scrolling through old messages and news stories to pass the time. The rules itched at the back of my mind, each one hovering like a threat. Midnight to 3:33 a.m. A strange, precise window of time. I kept the doors locked, my hand absently checking the latch as I sat there. There was no good reason to leave the car anyway. The last thing I wanted was to stumble around in the dark. Hearing nothing but my own footsteps off the empty streets, somewhere after 1 o'clock, the soft fog began to roll in, settling low over the streets. It wasn't thick, just enough to blur the edges of the world outside. I adjusted in my seat, watching as it twisted around the street lamps, coating the already quiet town in stillness. I checked my watch, 2:05 a.m., and that's when I saw it. The first test of the night. Headlights faint at first, glowing like distant fireflies on the opposite end of the street, slowly coming toward me. A perfectly normal sight on any other night, just a car driving through town. But I remember the rule. If you see a pair of headlights coming towards you after 2 a.m., turn off your lights. Put the car in park and keep your head down until they pass. Reluctantly, I reached for the light switch, flicking it off. The interior of the car plunged into darkness, the only glow coming from the faint red numbers on the dash. I put the car in park and I waited. My head tilted forward, but my eyes sneaked a glance up as the lights got closer. The car was old, the kind you might see in movies from the 70s. It rolled slowly, its headlights cutting through the fog in thin, eerie beams. There was something about it, something I couldn't put into words. The way it moved felt off, almost like it was floating rather than driving. As the car neared, I forced myself to look down, squeezing my eyes shut and pressing my forehead against the steering wheel. Every instinct screamed to lift my head. Just a glance, just enough to confirm it was some harmless late-night driver. But I stayed put, feeling a cold sensation spread over my skin as the car passed, slow and deliberate, its engine purring quietly as it glided by. I waited until I could no longer sense its presence, until the faint hum of its engine faded into the night. When I finally looked up, the street was empty, only the fog drifting lazily where the car had been. My hands were clammy, fingers stiff as I gripped the steering wheel. It was ridiculous, you know. I was a grown man. I was a cop, sitting here, terrified of a rule that was probably designed to haze rookies. But as I sat in silence, the unease only deepened. Hours stretched by in dead silence. I could feel myself starting to drift, the heavy drowsiness of a long night settling over me. I checked my watch at 3 a.m. on the dot. I rubbed my eyes, fighting to stay alert. I could feel the minutes dragging. Every tick of the clock, a subtle taunt. My gaze drifted up to the rearview mirror, out of habit more than anything, and that's when I saw it. A shape, faint but unmistakable, hovering in the back seat. At first I thought it was the fog, maybe some reflection from outside, but the shape didn't move. It didn't waver. It was as if someone were sitting right behind me, close enough to reach forward and grab me if they wanted to. Around 3 a.m., you might see someone in the rearview mirror. Do not look directly at them. Keep your focus straight ahead until they're gone. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel, my breathing shallow. I wanted to look, to turn around and see what the hell was behind me. But the words of the rules sat like lead in my mind. I forced my eyes to stay on the road ahead, my pulse a steady thud in my ears as I stared into the foggy emptiness beyond the windshield. The figure didn't move. It stayed there, just a dark silhouette. I could feel its presence, solid and raw. Minutes passed, and then finally the weight lifted. I didn't dare look in the mirror, not even a glance, until the feeling completely vanished. When I finally looked, the back seat was empty again. I took a shaky breath, fingers stiff, as I flexed them against the wheel. I felt a sense of dread, and no amount of logic or self-assurance seemed to shake it. I followed the rules. I was still here, but the night wasn't over, and somehow I knew I'd only scratched the surface. The hours continued to crawl as I sat alone in that car, my mind running through the rules over and over. The silence grew heavier every now and then. I'd catch myself looking at the rearview mirror or the foggy streets, expecting to see something that shouldn't be there. As the first hints of dawn came, a small part of me began to relax. The rules had felt like some kind of fever dream, a trial of my nerves. But I survived. Whatever haunted this town at night, whatever old twisted things came out, they left me alone. When I finally drove back to the station, the chief was waiting by the door, watching me with those tired eyes, as if he already knew what I'd seen. He didn't ask me if I'd followed the rules. I don't think he had to. The look he gave me was enough. An unspoken warning, a grim reminder that the night shift here was far from normal. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. I clocked out in silence, the chief's eyes on me as I left, feeling the weight of a night that lingered far longer than it should have. After that first night, sleep didn't come easily. I spent hours lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events over and over. The feeling of that thing in the back seat wouldn't leave my mind, nor would the memory of the old car rolling by. Part of me tried to brush it off, but another part, the one that had felt something unnatural, it knew better. On my second night, I arrived at the station just before midnight, trying not to notice the way the air felt heavier. I nodded to the chief as I clocked in. He just nodded back, wordless, and handed me the same paper he had the night before. I still had it, folded in my pocket like a talisman, but I took the new one anyway. Something about his face told me he wouldn't appreciate questions, so I didn't ask. I tucked the paper into my shirt pocket, though the words were burned into my mind well enough by then. It felt like they'd been there forever, and something told me they'd be staying with me for a long time. Midnight hot that I started my shift. The streets were quiet as they'd been the night before. Too quiet, really. In any other town, you might hear a few distant voices, maybe the dull hum of late-night TVs from the houses with curtains open. But here there was nothing. The fog had returned thicker than the night before, coiling around the street lamps like smoke. It was almost as if the town had been drained of life. I drove the main roads first, checking intersections, passing darkened storefronts and empty parks. The feeling of being watched crept over me, but I ignored it, forcing myself to follow the routine. A simple patrol, nothing more. An hour passed by without incident, then two. I was just beginning to let my guard down when the first tap came. It was soft at first, a little noise, barely noticeable over the hum of the engine. I thought it was the radio for a second, maybe some weird static or a misfire from the equipment. But then it came again, louder, like a finger tapping against glass. I remembered the rule. If you hear someone tapping on the window, ignore it. Even if they call your name, I froze. The taps were coming in a steady, unnatural rhythm. It moved from the driver's side window to the back, each tap precise and somehow too hollow, too deliberate. Like someone outside the car was making sure I heard every single sound. Then I heard my name. It wasn't loud, barely more than a whisper, but clear enough to leave no doubt. The voice wasn't one I recognized either. Officer Carter. The voice paused, letting my name hang in the air. I grabbed the wheel tighter, my eyes fixed on the dashboard, refusing to turn. The fog outside thickened and the tapping resumed. Faster now, as if whoever it was growing impatient. Officer Carter. The voice was closer this time, just outside my window. I looked ahead, my breathing shallow but controlled. Part of me wanted to look sideways, just to confirm it wasn't real, to see nothing and laugh it off as some late-night delusion. But the other part, the one that remembered the rules, it wouldn't let me move. The tapping grew louder, angrier, shifting between windows as though it was circling the car, looking for a way in, a bit down hard on the inside of my cheek, trying to keep myself anchored, refusing to acknowledge it. I didn't know how long I sat there. The tapping wouldn't stop. Each knock was more violent than the last, until it felt like something was hammering on the glass, desperate to break through. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that came after was almost worse. I could feel something outside watching me, but I didn't move, didn't so much as blink until the feeling lifted, until the fog began to dissipate. Only then did I dare look around, finding the windows perfectly intact. Not a single mark on the glass, whatever it was, had left, at least for now. I took a deep breath. The air thickened my lungs as I forced myself to relax. My hands were sore from gripping the wheel, my knuckles pale. The night continued on in silence, the minutes dragging into hours as I drove through the empty streets, every instinct on high alert. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, I found myself near the edge of town, with a main road cut into the open stretch of forest that bordered the county line. The fog had thinned out, drifting in patches that floated across the road, almost like they were watching me. I kept my gaze steady, the rules running through my mind like a mantra. And that's when I saw it. A patrol car parked just off the road, its lights off, but the shape unmistakable. It was an older model, maybe a few years out of commission, but definitely one of ours. A Ford with the same stripes, same decals, everything in place except the number on the side. The number was all wrong. I forced myself not to slow down, not to look too closely. I'd almost convinced myself it was just some abandoned car left by a previous shift. When its headlights clicked on, my stomach dropped as the car pulled onto the road behind me. Its lights dim but focused on me. I kept my speed steady, my eyes glued to the road ahead, refusing to acknowledge the vehicle creeping closer to me. The urge to speed up, to pull over, to do something clawed at me, but I didn't dare break the rule. It followed me for a good mile, always staying just behind me, its headlights a dull, unnatural glow. And then, without warning, it sped up, closing the distance until it was right on my bumper. My heart pounded in my chest as the car seemed to push closer, practically nudging me forward. I fought the urge to look in the rearview mirror, but the rule was clear. Do not acknowledge it for a second. I thought about braking, about forcing it to stop, but I knew that was a bad idea. There was something deeply wrong about that car, something that went well beyond mere imitation. After a long time, the car finally backed off, its headlights dimming as it slowed down, drifting back into the fog like it had never even been there. The road ahead stretched out in a desolate line, the fog thickening once more as I drove on. my hands gripping the wheel tightly, and the rest of the shift was a blur, silence pressing down on me. Every now and then I caught myself glancing at the mirrors, waiting for something. When the first light of morning broke through, I felt a physical weight lift off my shoulders. I drove back to the station, each mile feeling like a reprieve. Parked in the lot, taking a moment to collect myself before stepping out of the car. The chief was waiting by the door, his eyes scanning my face with a knowing look. "How was your shift?" he asked, though his tone made it clear. He already knew. I didn't respond. Instead, I handed him the folded paper. He nodded, tucking the paper into his pocket without a word. "All right, get some rest," he said. "Tonight's the hardest night of them all." I didn't know what he meant by that. Part of me didn't want to know. As I left the station, the weight of his words settled over me, and I realized just how deeply those rules had messed with my head. There was no doubt now this town had secrets, and whatever was out there in the dark had no intention of letting me leave. On the third night, I arrived at the station with a feeling I hadn't had since joining the force. Quiet dread. The chief was waiting by my car when I pulled in, and his expression was grimmer than usual. There were lines on his face that I hadn't seen the night before. His eyes were heavy and unblinking last night of the training shift, he said, handing me the paper with the rules again, as if I needed reminding. His hand lingered on the paper as I took it. There was something in his eyes, something close to sympathy. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but then he just nodded and stepped back, his silence somehow making this even worse. I settled into the car, checked my radio, and listened to the static hum over the speakers as I looked at the rules one last time. Rule 6. Never answer your radio after 3:33 a.m. If you hear any voices, turn it off and don't turn it back on until sunrise. Now the other rules had taken their toll each night, grinding away at the last bits of logic and rationality I'd held on to. But that last rule was the scariest one to me. I've been a cop long enough to know that a radio was a lifeline, the only connection we had out there. It was a rule that seemed meant to push me past the point of reason, a test I didn't fully understand. Midnight came quietly. The town was cloaked in the same heavy fog, thicker than the other nights. The first couple hours passed without incident. But as I sat there in silence, I felt something heavy in the air. At around 2, headlights flared in the distance. They moved slowly, cutting through the fog as they made their way toward me. This time, I didn't wait to test it. I clicked off my lights, put the car in park, and ducked my head low, keeping my eyes on the floor as the lights came closer. I could hear the hum of the engine as it passed. The sound was raw and hollow, echoing like it was coming from a different place altogether. When I looked after it was gone, I saw the fog settle again, undisturbed, as if the car had never been there. And then, as the clock ticked toward 3 o'clock, something happened that made me grip the wheel. From the corner of my eye, I saw a figure. A man standing just outside the driver's side window. He was far too tall, and his head was tilted. Do not acknowledge it, I thought. I could see from the corner of my eye that the thing was waving at me now, slowly waving. And I don't know how exactly, but I knew it was smiling. Finally, after a long time, the tall figure faded into the mist. Time dragged on. I was exhausted, my nerves frayed. I kept glancing at the clock, watching the minutes crawl past. And then, at exactly 3:33 a.m., the radio crackled alive. I jumped, the sound cutting through the silence like a knife. Static buzzed from the speaker, crackling with faint, indistinct voices that shifted in and out, as though someone was trying to reach me from far away. I turned to switch the radio off, my hand hovering over the button. But then through the static, I heard a voice that I hadn't heard in years, one that I knew better than my own Daniel. "Daniel, please, can you hear me?" My blood ran cold. It was my father's voice. He died 6 years ago, buried in a small cemetery just outside of town. I'd stood by his grave, watched as the dirt covered his casket, and yet here he was, speaking to me through the crackling haze of the radio. "Please, Daniel, I need your help." I froze, my hand trembling. Every instinct screamed to turn it off, to follow the rule, to leave the past where it belonged. But the voice continued, pleading. "Daniel, you gotta listen to me, please. I'm stuck here. I can't leave. You have to help me, son. You're the only one who can. The word scratched at something raw inside of me. Memories of late night shifts in his study, the smell of his aftershave lingering in the air, his hand heavy on my shoulder as he gave me his old stories of life and loss of pride in the force. Every piece of logic I had was melting away, replaced by that familiar ache of grief. Dad, the words slipped down before I could stop myself, my voice barely a whisper. There was silence on the other end for a moment, and then his voice came back, softer this time and more real. Daniel, thank God. I knew you'd hear me. I knew you'd find me, son. I just need you to come. Come to the place where we used to go by the river. Please, son, you have to hurry. The river. We'd spent so many weekends there when I was a kid, fishing off the banks in the early morning light, watching the water as it drifted by. I could almost see it. Smell the fresh dewy grass, feel the rough bark of the old oak tree where we used to sit together. But something was wrong. I could feel it deep in my bones. A wrongness that didn't belong in my father's voice. The radio crackled again, his voice fading in and out, slipping between familiar tones and something colder, something that shouldn't have been there. Turn it off, I whispered to myself, trying to tear my hand away from the radio. But the voice kept pulling me in, tugging at memories. I hadn't visited in years. Please, son, just come to the river, Daniel. I'm waiting for you. My hand hovered over the dial, my mind spinning. And then I thought of the rule. Never answer your radio after 333. If you hear voices, turn it off and don't turn it back on until sunrise. Clenched my jaw, forcing myself to turn the knob, cutting the voice off mid-sentence. The silence that followed was deafening, a weight pressing down on me. I sat there, the only sound, the faint hum of the engine. The voice sounded like him. Every inflection, every hesitation, just as I'd remembered. But I knew deep down. I knew that whatever I'd heard on that radio couldn't have been him. It was something else, something that knew him, something that had reached into the depths of my mind and pulled out the one voice that could have broken me. I finished my shift in a haze, barely noticing as the first light crept over the horizon. When I returned to the station, the chief was there. Waiting for me by the door, his eyes were dark hollow, like a man who'd seen one too many things he wished he hadn't. I didn't say a word. He just gave me a slow, understanding nod and placed a hand on my shoulder. When the shift ended, I drove straight to the cemetery. The morning sun cast long shadows across the graves as I walked between the rows, making my way to the simple headstone near the back, marked with my father's name. I crouched down, setting a hand of wildflowers on the grass, the cool morning air chilling my skin. I don't know what I heard last night, I murmured. But I know it wasn't you. The wind rustled through the trees, the leaves whispering as they drifted down around me. There was a stillness here, a peaceful silence that I hadn't felt since the beginning of my shift 3 days ago. Whatever haunted those nights, whatever lived in the dark corners of that town, it hadn't followed me here. I stayed there for a while, listening to the quiet. The memories drifted around me, and as the sun rose higher, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, I made it through something that was meant to break me. When I finally left, I didn't look back. The rules stayed with me, though. A warning, a reminder that some things in this world exist beyond the edge of reason, and that sometimes survival depends on following rules we can't understand. I drove back to town, and as I passed the station, I saw the chief standing there, watching me drive by with a look that told me that he understood. You're driving home at night when you see a coffin in the front yard of every house on your street. Do you open one of the coffins and look inside? Do you call the police or see don't worry about it and just go to sleep? Here's the story. My wife and I were on our way home from dinner tonight when we first saw it, dead center in the yard of the first house we saw among all the skeletons, scary giant spiders and lights. It was a perfect replication of a dark brown coffin. My wife looked at me and said, "Damn, I wonder where they got that. Must have been expensive." She looked a little jealous. Typically, we are the house on the street that goes all out with the Halloween decorations, but after a couple bad years of work, we just haven't been able to refresh our collection. We slowly passed to admire the decorations and noticed the house next to them had the same coffin decoration as well, even though they don't typically decorate. In fact, the coffin was the only decoration. No lights, no jack-o'-lanterns, no creepy dolls. Just a dark brown coffin in the center of the yard, almost invisible in the growing dark. As I was scowling at the creepy weirdness of just one decoration, I heard my wife say, "Oh my God, there's another one." I looked ahead to the other side of the road where she was pointing. I stopped the car. "It's all of them," I said, staring down the empty ST. Ahead and down the streets to the left and the right, we saw the exact coffin in the exact center of every lawn. We turned to each other, and I'm sure my face mirrored her freaked out expression. I crept down the streets toward our house, seeing coffin after coffin. Our neighbors had begun to notice as we saw some were peering out the window at the apparently unexpected decoration. As we passed our next door neighbors, we saw the couple in their yard looking down at the coffin. His expression was one of fury, but she had her hand over her mouth and was slightly shaking. She'd just beaten cancer. Their van, parked in front of the house, hit our lawn, but I knew what we were going to see before we passed it and pulled into our driveway. Seeing it, I could feel my heart race and a cold sweat trickling down my spine. Almost robotically, we grasped at each other's hands and walked up to the box. I gave it a little shove with my foot, and it didn't budge. A harder kick. Nothing. This wasn't some cheapo thing from Spirit Halloween. It felt like the real thing. I held Carrie's hand tighter and scanned up and down the street. It was completely silent, except for the quiet sobs from my neighbor. More were looking out at the coffins, some trying to open them. Some tried to move them, all to no avail. "Let's go inside." The sudden suggestion from my wife made me jump, and I felt a stab of ice in my heart. Normally scaring each other is a cause for celebration, but this time, what kind of weird-ass joke is this? I'm looking at the damn thing from my living room window, and I have no idea what to do. Update with my earlier comment, I slept like shit last night. I don't know if this is real or a dream I had. I'm prone to nightmares, but I got up in the middle of the night and went to our front window to take another look at that damn thing. I looked through the break in the curtains, and it was still there, eerily reflecting the white blue of our porch light. My mind blank. I stared and eventually noticed movement across the street. When I first saw it, my mind screamed ghost, even though I don't believe in that shit, but after that initial scare, I realized it was just Sandy. Is that her name? Across the street, coming outside to look at the coffin. She was walking up to it slowly, like she was scared it would rush her. She walked right up to it and bent down, easily lifting the lid. What the hell? I finally was able to see her face, and it was blank. Not scared, not angry, not curious, nothing. My heart raised and I felt sick as I watched her get into the coffin, and as the lid closed, I must have passed out. I woke up in my bed just a few moments later. I hurried over to the window to see our coffin still in the yard. The lawn across the street was empty. I'm going to go over there this morning to see how they are. God, I don't think they even know my name. I'll update soon. Update. So after I saw what happened with my neighbor, I hurried to the bedroom and shook Carrie awake. I watched her eyes go wide as I described Sandy getting into the coffin. That can't be real. I know, and their coffin is gone. What do we do? We need to check on her, my wife said. We pulled on our clothes, went out, and started across the street. Carrie abruptly halted in the middle and put her arm across my chest to block me. She pointed to a house down our side of the street and across to the right. Their lawns were also coffin-free. Everyone had one, right? She asked. Yeah, I think so. We continued to the door. I looked down to make sure I wasn't stepping on any of Sandy's flowers. I was confused to see that the garden was mostly dead. There were some empty plastic pots scattered around, not even nice ones, but the plain black container that plants from the store come in. It looked like they'd been sitting there for months. What happened? This was a nicely maintained flower garden yesterday, wasn't it? Carrie was looking at it too. It wasn't like that yesterday, right? I looked at her and shook my head. She moved to the front door as I stared at the garden. Carrie's sharp rapping on the door shook me out of my reverie. She waited a few moments and knocked again. She turned to me and shrugged, a thin, worry line creasing her brow. I cupped my hands around my eyes and looked into their window. I noticed right away the foyer was a mess of boxes, tools, and even some car parts. Like I said, I didn't know her well at all, but it seemed weird that the inside of their house seemed like such a dump. "I'll go around the back," I told her. It was uncomfortable enough just walking up to a neighbor's house and knocking. Dropping by is a thing that seems to be going by the social wayside. Opening their side gate and entering the backyard felt straight up wrong, like I was trespassing. I guess that is literally true. I'd never seen them before, but the gardens in the back were also mostly dead or overgrown. There were tools and gardening implements laying about the yard, as well as a long and used and dilapidated doghouse. Attached to the doghouse was a frayed, dirty rope, and on the other end of the rope was a torn collar that may have once been red, but was now tattered and rusty brown. I noticed a name tag on the collar, but couldn't bring myself to read it. Leaving that, I navigated the patchy grass to look into the sliding glass door on the porch, through a gap created by a single missing panel on their vertical blinds. I saw that their living area was completely coated in what looked like unwashed laundry, jeans, socks, and various tees and flannels. All looked like men's clothes. My imagination must have run away with me, because one of the piles looked like there was something under it. I took an involuntary step back as my breath caught in my throat. No, just a normal pile of clothes. More than freaked out, I hurried back around to the front, making sure to close the gates, and told Carrie what I saw. With no answer at the door, we started back home and saw the next door neighbors staring at their coffin. Greg, I thought. His name's Greg. He noticed us looking and called to us. Hey, what kind of person would do something like this? The last thing Rebecca needs is to see this in our yard. She just went into remission. Yeah, I'm sorry, man, I replied. We're shaken too. Weirdly, he looked at our yard and seemed shocked to see a coffin there. He took a long look up and down the street, as if looking at it for the first time. Why don't they have one? He asked, pointing across the road. Or them. He pointed at each house that no longer had a coffin. I explained that each did have one last night, but they disappeared. His face went from anger to confusion. I started to ask him if he'd spoken to any of the other neighbors, but I could tell from his faraway expression that he was miles away. He stared back down at the coffin, slowly shaking his head and rubbing the back of his neck. Carrie pulled on my hand and led past the coffin into our front door. Back at home, Carrie and I talked about what to do. She wanted to call the police and do a wellness check, so I picked up my phone. They must have been getting a lot of calls because it went straight to voicemail. I left the reason for the call in my contact details. Carrie noticed my scowl as I hung up inside. We discussed whether we should call 911, but decided not to since we didn't know if there was an actual emergency. I did, however, call my ex-wife and left a message asking her not to send the kids over today. Better safe than sorry. Having nothing better to do, we logged into work. Well, shit lunch is over, and I haven't eaten. I guess I had more to tell you than I thought. It's now evening, and I didn't get a chance to post the above update. That works because I have more to add. Yesterday evening, the husband across the street usually gets home at 7 p.m. on the dot. Today was no different. When I saw his truck pull up, I went out and met him in his driveway. I probably should have asked Carrie his name before I went. He saw me approaching and scratched at his gray beard. He looked like he'd aged a decade in one night, and he didn't have many decades left in the first place. Hey man, I was talking to Greg over there a little earlier. What do you think of all this? I waved my hand up and down the street. It is some freaky shit, man. At first I thought it was a new thing everyone wanted for Halloween. Like those damn giant skeletons last year. Waste of money if you ask me. But a couple folk down the road said they didn't buy them. Just there like they always had been. Not sure why I'm one of the ones that didn't get one. But you had one last night, I said, confused. At this point, I noticed Carrie was watching from the front door. No, I didn't have one last night. He shot me a bit of side-eye. Oh, I said, my mistake. I paused for a moment. Does Sandy have any thoughts? He was getting impatient. Is that the lady 2 doors down? How the hell should I know what she thinks? I took a longer pause than he had patience for. No, Dad. Dick. He grimaced at me. No, Dick. Your wife, Sandy. His eyes narrowed, and he looked me up and down. What is wrong with you, guy whose name I don't even know? You moved here years ago. You don't talk to no one, then don't even notice I'm not married. Tell me something. Has you ever seen a woman around my house? No, of course not. I apologize, Dave. I must have confused you with somebody else. I'm sorry. I'll just go inside and let you be. Yeah, you have a good one too, idiot, he said under his breath. I must have looked completely abashed when I went back inside, because despite everything, Carrie raised her eyebrows at me with a small smirk. So it went well. She teased. She always knew how to make me smile. I told her everything he said, making sure to remember every detail of him apparently not ever having a wife. What the hell? Did you tell him what you saw last night? No, which is probably how I made it back here with an unbroken jaw. If you want to go over there and tell him how his wife that he never had got into a coffin that was never on his lawn and disappeared, then go for it. In fact, you should. I'm sure he'd be delighted to speak with you. We both started laughing. One thing we've always been good at is being able to carry the other when things got tough, and to keep each other in good spirits. When things got really tough, we decided at dinner we were going to stay up and watch the houses on our street. We want to see if we can catch anyone else getting into coffins. I made coffee. She boiled a pot of tea. Then we sat down to watch some TV to distract us while we waited. She leaned her head against my chest, and I put my arm around her this morning. This has gone beyond weird and frightening to downright terrifying. We're getting the hell out of here. Susan is gone, along with most of our neighbors, and we've seen the things that are taking the coffins. Carrie is packing for us while I write this update. We waited up last night as planned. We got out a couple chairs and even brought our little iron fire pit from the backyard to keep us warm. We decided to walk around the block as it drew towards midnight, and we noticed that there were other watchers. Some sat inside by their windows with their lights off, some on their front porches, some in the driveway like us. We even saw one old fake wood-paneled station wagon driving a slow circuit around the block. It looked like about 1 out of every 5 houses no longer had a coffin. That only took about 15 minutes. So we sat by the fire, drank our caffeine, and waited. Have any of you done any camping? Have you noticed how you can get to staring into the campfire and just lose time? My dad used to call that dreaming the fire. I was so deep into the dreaming that I almost didn't notice the sound of Susan and Greg's door unlatching. Carrie gave my shoulder a hard shake. She pointed, and I saw Susan walking slowly and stiffly towards her coffin for a moment. All I could do was stare, too frightened to get up. Susan, Carrie said, jolting me out of the chair. She was already halfway into their yard before I was able to catch up. We got about 5 feet away from the coffin, and all energy was zapped out of my body. I felt too weak to do anything more than stand. And I heard a small whimper come from Carrie's throat. Or it might have been mine. I passed out before, and this felt like the first few moments after regaining consciousness. A light sweat covered my body, and my muscles refused to do anything. Somehow I remained standing. I couldn't look away from Susan's slow march to the coffin. I heard Carrie try to yell for Greg, but it came out as a weak moan, like when someone's calling out in their sleep during a nightmare. I willed my eyes to roll towards the house, and in the bay window, I saw the pale form of Greg standing and watching his wife. I could see the orange light from our campfire flickering into trails left by tears going down his face. Susan was in the coffin. She bent down and lifted the lid inside. It was a simple white silk lining with a matching pillow. Susan got in, lied down, closed the lid, and that was it. I felt some strength radiating back in my body, as Carrie did, because once again she started moving first. She grabbed the lid of the coffin, sobbing as she tried to lift it. A split second later, I was with her, pulling with all my strength against the lid. But it held. We stopped at the same time. I looked again at Greg and saw him turn and walk away from the window into the darkness of his living room. Through my frantic pulling, I felt Carrie place a shaking hand on my own. "Joe," she said. I stopped and looked at her. She was staring at the road with wild, panicked eyes. Parked on the road was a shiny hearse, so black that the light from the campfire and the stars just fell into it, trapped for eternity. The modern angles on it were sharp and mean, created to perfectly communicate that you have forever lost someone you loved. Standing in a line behind the hearse and facing us were four identical figures. They were tall, towering over the top of the black machine. Their gaunt faces were turned towards us, and each showed a sneer of superiority slashed across their thin, pale lips. Held under their left arms, each held a black silk top hat, and in their right an ebony cane topped with a simple silver globe, the only hint of color on their persons. Each moved towards the coffin and placed their cane vertically on the ground, where it balanced perfectly still. On them they hung their hats, and the cane still did not waver. They formed a lined path from the coffin to the rear of the hearse. They lined up on either side of the coffin and lifted it to their shoulders, showing no sign of strain. They walked in perfect sync to the hearse, and the rear door opened to accept its prize. Neither Carrie nor I dared to move. The ritual that we were watching was something old and unholy. The coffin was in, and the door closed. And then the pallbearers were circling us. Their manner was one of observation, like we were something tiny and meaningless, maybe even amusing. I've never felt fear like this before. I somehow knew that no amount of running or fighting would ever overcome this absolute finality, that death was all that awaited, and it would be an eternity of horror. Two of the pallbearers swiveled aside and gracefully bade us to our house with outstretched arms. We walked together, and when we passed them, all faded to black. We woke up this morning together in bed. Carrie and I looked at each other, and there was nothing to say. We talked about leaving, but somehow we know that we can't. But we're still going to try. We've tried to call the police. I tried to call my ex-wife. Carrie tried to call her parents. All went right to voicemail, and we realized that we've gotten no calls, no voicemails, no text messages, nothing since this thing started. I'll update soon. Sunday morning, the 7th day. I'm sorry it's been so long for this update. It's been a screwed up couple days, but all's well. This whole experience seems to be fading from my memory, but I'll try to give as much detail as I can remember. So, we did try to make it out of the neighborhood. God, was it a week ago? We packed some clothes, my mountain of anxiety meds, and some bathroom supplies, and we got the hell out of Dodge. Driving through the neighborhood, we saw a few of our neighbors wandering around, confused, crying, seemingly lost and alone. None even looked at us as we sped past. We also noticed even more yards empty of the coffins. It looked like maybe about half had someone taken. Carrie was stunned by how many had gone. I saw her mouth moving as she looked out the windows and finally figured out that she was whispering, "That's not gonna be me. That's not gonna be me." Over and over. I put a hand on her knee to calm her down. "Hey, we're leaving. We're gonna be fine," I said. She said nothing. We made it to the exit of the neighborhood and I stopped. I was almost expecting to see a glowing force field holding us in, but all I saw was the road out and entrance sign. "Welcome to Harmony Hills. No solicitors." I slowly pulled out, and once I was sure that the car wasn't going to immediately and mysteriously break down or explode, or that we were going to get sucked into a portal to hell, I hit the gas. Carrie watched the neighborhood disappear behind us and let out an audible sigh of relief. We continued driving down the empty road, feeling the freedom of the passing pines and sand to the left and right of us. Despite the chill in the air, we opened the windows just to feel the wind like a celebration of our escape. We looked at each other and even smiled a little. "What do you think's going to happen to the rest of them?" Carrie asked. "Well, hopefully they'll do what we did and get the hell out." "Yes," she said. The line of concern showed again. We drove for some time without seeing another car. Not unusual considering our remote location, but I was eager to see some normal people doing normal things, their faces unmarred by grief, panic, or despair. Finally, we pulled into the first sign of civilization, a small strip mall. Today, the parking lots were empty, and the lights in all of the stores were dark. I felt a stab of panic and looked at Kiri. She was in full deer and headlights mode. I opened the car door, and the snap of the latch made her jump, a small shriek escaping her. I stepped out of the car, sensing something was off above and beyond the lack of people. I walked up to the Cranberry Market storefront and peered in. Not only were there no customers or clerks, there was nothing. No shelves, no counters. The coffee machines were gone, as well as everything in the refrigerators. The floors were empty and gleaming white in the sunlight that made it through the store windows. It was as if the store had just been built and was waiting to be supplied. A quick walk down the rest of the strip showed that every single storefront was in the same sterile state, and there was no sound other than the whistle of the breeze through the trees. Normally you'd hear mourning doves and chipmunks rustle about. There was nothing. Not a single scrap of sound gave evidence of anything living around us. I hurried to the car, and once I was in and pulling out of the parking lot, I told Carrie what I saw. She barely reacted, just a small nod. "We are getting out of here," I reassured. "We just need to get far enough away." 25 minutes later, we were driving through the closest town, a quaint little village with a typically lively main street, and an inn which was restored from an old cranberry packing house. It was empty. Driving slowly past, we could see that each business and restaurant was in the same pristine yet abandoned state. Still, we were met with no cars on the road or people walking the sidewalks. The world had emptied, and we were the last drops of life remaining. As soon as we realized there was no one, I sped the car up and went for a distance. We headed up the coast through New York on highways, empty of cars. I thought the sight of the city, silent and empty, was the eeriest part of the trip. Carrie was more freaked out by driving through the empty and dark Lincoln Tunnel. I can see her point. There were a few times where I thought I saw movement just outside the range of our headlights. It still gives me the shivers. Even sitting at home on my couch now, the sun started to go down as we approached Hartford. So we decided to stop and look for food and someplace to sleep. The houses around us were just as empty as every other building, so we found nothing to eat, nor could we find a bed. In the last house we entered, we just put down a pillow made of our own packed clothing and cuddled clothes for warmth. The lack of any sort of noise created a constant rush of white noise in our ears as our brains tried to create any kind of stimulation at all. Despite the phantom noise, we eventually found sleep. In my dream, I was looking out our living room window. I could see Carrie moving slowly towards the coffin. Surrounding her were the pallbearers, with their tall black satin hats and expressions of complete and utter glee on their faces. Their eyes widened into light over sharp-toothed smiles, and Carrie opened the lid and started to get in. I could move. Tears were streaming down my face, and I knew in a few moments I wouldn't even remember her. Meeting her at a friend's party and clicking over the old Legend of Zelda games. Both of us cracked up as we each dropped our wedding rings during our wedding ceremony. All of that was about to be wiped from existence. As the lid closed, I woke up weeping into my hands. Something was different. I heard Carrie stir, rustling in the sheets. I looked through my fingers like a child watching a horror movie. We were back home. I woke Carrie up the rest of the way, and she dully looked around before falling back onto her pillow. Our clothes were back in the drawers, and we were in our pajamas. Looking out our bedroom window, I saw that the car was gone. So that was it then. We were stuck. We spent the rest of the next several days sitting in the house, just waiting. We barely spoke. I noticed that the other neighbors had stopped coming outside too. The neighborhood became as quiet and empty as the world outside had been. Every day became enshrouded by a dense fog of apathetic anticipation. Then, last night I awoke at around midnight. When I heard a scream from Carrie, it was the first sound she'd made in days, and it pierced through my head like a barbed arrow. I shot up out of bed to see one of the pallbearers looking at her through the window, smiling and beckoning to her. Suddenly, I felt energy fly back into my body, and I ran down the stairs to where our bedroom was on the outside of the house. When I got there, I could hear my heart racing in my ears and felt the surges of blood pulsating in my neck. Nothing. The pallbearer had spirited away, if he'd ever been there at all, without deciding to. I started walking around the block as the vigor left my body. I noticed that only 1 or 2 out of every 10 houses now had a casket, and I realized this was about to end back at my house. I mourned the life Carrie and I had together, knowing it was already lost. Monday, the 31st. Midnight. Yesterday, Carrie didn't get out of bed. She just wrapped herself in a cocoon of sheets with just her eyes and nose peeking out. I tried to rouse her, but she didn't react. I spent the day on the couch, wasting the last few moments I had with her when night came. I went back up to bed and kissed her on the cheek through the blankets as I got under the covers. Midnight. I wake to a moon that is painting our room in incandescent white blue, and to an empty bed, but there was no stab of fear, no heart leaping into my throat, just a dull, plodding ache of loss. Did I even want to watch this happen? My legs carried me down the stairs, and I turned to the corner of our living room. There was Carrie, watching out the window, tears streaming down her face. I don't think she was able to move, but she was looking at me out of the corner of her eye, her face expressionless. And I understand. The strength is gone from my legs, and I sit heavily on the couch. Inevitability washes over me as I think about what it will be like to be gone, to never have been here in the first place. I mourn the loss of my life. I mourn my children who I hadn't seen in what felt like an eternity and were about to have never been born. I mourn the happy moments filled with love and laughter that were about to never have happened. I mourn myself. I can hear slow tires crunching on the road outside. I hope I'm ready. Never join a sleep experiment. Life was never easy for me. I made some mistakes, but no one deserves what I went through. But for all this mess with a sleep experiment, I was just another guy. I dropped out of high school after my parents died in a car accident. Things spiraled down from there. I had nothing, no family to take me in, and no money to keep me staying at the house I've lived in my whole life. I fell in with the wrong crowd. We were all trying to scrape by doing odd jobs. We do anything for a bit of cash. So when the guy suggested breaking into this rich dude's place, I didn't think twice. We wouldn't take anything the guy would miss, they said, and so I went along with it. Bad call. We got caught. The security system went off and all my friends just bolted. No one even bothered to look back to make sure I made it out of the house. So I was left holding the bag all by myself. I got the book thrown at me to set an example. The judge gave me the heaviest sentence he could. I was looking at spending years of my life in prison, and that's when the feds offered me a deal. They're running a sleep experiment, you see, and they need unique case studies. I didn't really have a choice, but they made it out like I was lucky to be chosen for this. They needed people who had a history of sleep disorders like me. See, ever since I was a little kid, I've had this problem. Most kids are afraid of the dark or what's under their bed. Me, I was afraid of falling asleep. Sounds weird, right? But every time I close my eyes, I get stuck. My mind would wake up, but I couldn't move. I'd want to scream and kick, but my body wouldn't listen to me. More than once, I was scared that I was actually dead or something. The doctors called it sleep paralysis. It haunted me all my life, but because of this unique condition of mine, I got picked to be the government's new guinea pig. They were funding a new kind of experiment to create some sort of, super drug. The goal was to completely eliminate the need for sleep. I have to admit, it sounded crazy. Imagine a world where you never have to sleep again. Man, all the stuff you could do, And who better to test this new super drug than a guy who hated every minute of sleep? Now, I still remember that day clearly. As soon as I woke up, I knew something was wrong. I was going through my usual day at the prison. I was napping the afternoon away on my bunk, and that's until Dr. Brown came in. He was the brainy type, glasses and all, always had that clipboard with him. "Hello, Ted. I'm Dr. Brown. About something that might interest you," he said. "Honestly, nothing in prison ever interests you except getting the hell out." But I let him talk. "We're doing a sleep study," he began. "It's for this new drug we're developing. It's supposed to stop people from needing to sleep so much. And we thought, well, with your unique nighttime situation, you would be the perfect candidate." At first I laughed. "So you want to give me a drug for my sleep paralysis?" "Doc, I don't need less sleep. I need better sleep," I told him. But Dr. Brown was persistent. "It's not about reducing sleep," he said. It could also help with your condition. After all, less sleep means fewer episodes of paralysis. And of course, I'm also authorized to offer you a reduced sentence if the study goes well. Alright, so that did sound good. Okay, Doc, I'll try your magic pill, I said. And that's how I got roped into this study. They moved me to a special wing of the hospital. And they had me take this red pill every night, right before lights out. Now, I did have high hopes for this pill those first few nights. I'd go through my day just looking forward to finally getting a good night's rest. But night after night, I still found myself stuck as usual. I couldn't move, and I'd spend the hours just watching the ceiling. It continued like that for a while. Researchers would come into my cell almost every day. They'd bring in their clipboards and start measuring my blood pressure and all that. It was routine. They'd come in to check my vitals during the day, then give me the red pill at night. Sometimes I'd sit down and talk with them. Apparently, the government had poured a boatload of money into this thing, and that Dr. Brown wasn't just any ordinary guy. He had some powerful friends who pulled some strings to make him the lead doc. He was not someone to mess with. Worse, I caught wind from the other inmates that this experiment wasn't anything new. Another group of scientists from Russia did the exact same thing decades ago. None of them survived. Not the scientists, and especially not the test subjects. One of the guys said the final test subject got shot point blank. I didn't know what to do with that info. Didn't feel real good about being part of the second batch of guinea pigs for some failed Russian sleep experiment. But I wasn't going to start messing with Dr. Brown. Not after what he did to one of the inmates. Time has gone by, and we're a couple weeks into the study now. The doc's usually all about his notes and keeping cool, always polite and professional. But one day, he just lost it. You see, the inmate across from my cell was a big dude, always causing trouble and looking for a fight. So anyway, he starts mouthing off to DR. Brown, saying all sorts of stuff about the experiments. He was trying real hard to get under the doc's skin. And Dr. Brown, he's trying to stay professional, but you can see he's boiling. Then, out of nowhere, Brown just snaps, grabs his clipboard, and whacks it right across the guy's face. The sound echoed down the hall, and everybody went silent. You know, it's serious when even the tough guys are speechless. The big dude down on the floor, holding his face, was completely shocked. And Dr. Brown just straightens his coat, adjusts his glasses, and walks off like nothing happened. You think he'd get in trouble for abusing his patients, but I heard from the other docs he's done it before. And the doc never got in trouble for it. Everyone got the hint down here. Well, Brown was the guy in charge. But still, even back then, I would have dealt with Brown rather than go to sleep again. Because it felt like my paralysis was getting worse the longer the experiment ran. I started seeing something when I went to sleep. It started like any other night. I'd taken the red pill like normal. But when I got stuck again, I felt like I wasn't alone anymore. In the corner of my room, I could see someone standing there. Even from the corner of my vision, I could see just how tall he was. He was really tall and skinny. He looked like he was wearing an old suit. In his hand was a single flickering candle. And then slowly he brought the candle up to his face. If I could have, I would have gagged at the sight of it. His eyes were sunken pits of nothing. His mouth had too many teeth, but it was his skin that was the worst. It looked like his skin was made of candle wax. It melted in the heat and it started dripping globs onto the floor. I tried to scream, to move, to do anything, but I couldn't. It was just me and him stuck in a tiny dark cell. I named him Candleface after that night. I thought it'd fit. After that episode, waking up never felt so good. I looked sick and I felt like it too. I couldn't just keep this to myself. I had to tell someone, and Dr. Brown, well, he was supposed to be in charge of making sure we were all right. So I went to him and I told him about Candleface. I explained how this had never happened before. Dr. Brown listened, nodding along as I described the figure, the candle, his face, everything. I was hoping for some kind of answer, but when I finished, he just gave me this look. That said, he'd heard it all before. It's probably just a side effect of the drug, he said. All calm and matter of fact, like these kinds of vivid dreams or visions, It can happen when you're adjusting to medications. Sometimes things get a bit worse before they get better, he said. I wanted to argue to tell him this was different, but the look on his face told me he'd already made up his mind. It was frustrating, but I knew what I needed to do. Let it go. What else could I do? So I just nodded, pretending to accept his explanation. But inside I wasn't convinced. Not one bit. It kept happening night after night. I'd wake up paralyzed, and I'd see Candleface in the corner. And every night he'd be a bit closer than before. I wasn't really sure at first, but after a week, I knew he'd been moving closer to me. I started talking more and more about him, until one day, I was at the doc's office for my weekly psych eval. And, of course, the only thing I could talk about was the guy with the candle. Doc Brown cut me off, and he gave me a look that said he was just about ready to strangle me. Okay, mister. Alan, let me be blunt, okay? Your lack of education doesn't qualify you to make such assessments. You understand, he said. Can you believe that? I was so close to jumping across a phone desk, showing him exactly what my lack of education could do. But right then there's a knock. One of his lab coats comes in talking about some emergency. Everything is proceeding as expected, mister. Alan, your cooperation is appreciated, but your concerns are unfounded, Doc Brown said before rushing me out of his office. And things didn't get better after that. Every time I closed my eyes, hoping for just a little rest, Candleface was there. And every night he got closer. The first time he appeared right next to my bed, I woke up screaming. I could almost feel the heat from his candle and see the melted wax of his face. I was a grown man, and here I was freaking out about a guy I saw in my dreams. Dr. Brown and the others didn't know what to tell me. I could tell they were getting frustrated because the drug wasn't working like they'd hoped. Instead of sleeping less, I was too scared to sleep at all. I would hear them talk about me sometimes. They'd talk about other research participants they could use, like we were pigs at the market. They couldn't fail, they said. Not like the first experiment. So you know what they did? They upped the dose more of the drug, like that was going to fix everything. I tried to tell them it wasn't about the amount, that something was clearly wrong, really wrong with that pill. But it was like talking to a brick wall. They had their plan, and they were sticking to it. I remember taking that bigger dose for the first time. I felt like I was about to have a heart attack from the stress. It wasn't just the fear of seeing Candleface again, though that was bad enough. It was this feeling deep down, that we were messing with something we didn't understand. Something dangerous. But again, I knew I didn't have a choice. They told me I'd get a reduced sentence. But until that happened, I was stuck here. I spent my days focused on my prison chores, and they were never ending. Sweep this, scrub that like it'd make any difference in this dump. And those guards, man, they love to watch us squirm like they got a kick out of seeing how much they could push before we break. So one day I'm mopping the floor like usual. I was feeling awful, though, after the docs increased my dose. I was moving really slow. Each push of the mop felt like dragging lead. And that's when two guards come over. They had these big grins on their faces, and they smelled drunk. I tried to ignore them. I kept my head down and focused on the task, but one of them kicked the bucket over, spilling dirty water on the floor. They both had a nice laugh at that one. And, something in me snapped. I was tired, I was angry, and most of all, I was scared. But none of these two idiots. And before I could even stop myself, I looked them in the eye and said, "Why don't you guys piss off? Yeah, that was a big mistake." The first guard doesn't even say a word. He just swings. His fist connects with my eye, and a sharp bolt of pain goes through me. Next thing I know, I'm eating on the floor. There was a moment right then when I wanted to fight back. But the drug made me feel like wet paper. Every time, DR. Brown upped that dose. Things got worse for me. They kept hoping it would fix whatever was wrong with me, that I'd finally stop with these sleep paralysis episodes. They kept looking at their charts and numbers, and they'd be confused because I wasn't fitting into their neat little boxes. My sleep paralysis wasn't just bad now. It was ruining my daily life. Every time I closed my eyes, Candle's face was there, getting closer and closer until it felt like he could reach out and burn me with a damn candle. I would wake up feeling exhausted. I was as zombies during the day, too tired to do anything, but too scared to go back to sleep. It was hell. And then one day things got even worse. One of the inmates in my wing was found dead. They found him all burned up in his bunk. I heard his whole place. It was a mess of scorch marks, blood, and wax. Yeah, wax. I couldn't believe it either. And guess who was picked to clean it up? Yep, me. The air reeked of smoke and burning wax when I walked in. The walls were covered in scorch marks. Splatters of blood covered the floor, dried and dark. And the wax. The wax was everywhere. There were pools of it on the ground and dripping on the walls. There were even clumps of it on the burned remains of the bunk. After what happened, they locked down the entire block. Cops came in, poking around, asking questions, but they left with nothing, just a bunch of confused looks and shrugged shoulders. Dr. Brown told the cops that it was just a case of gang violence. He didn't want an investigation interfering with his study. I think he called in a favor to get this swept under the rug, but the deaths just kept piling up. The next victim was some low-level bully. He would never go after anyone bigger than him, so he loved to pick on me especially. And then we woke up one morning, and poof, he was burned up too. The only thing left was his cell, covered in blood, ashes, and wax. And then a week after that, another cell was found with a burned-up bunk. It didn't take me long to figure out the pattern. Every one of these victims were guys that had made my life a living hell. The whole prison block was freaking out. We didn't know what it all meant, whether it was faulty wiring or someone going around torching cells. You'd think after the second death, the guards would have had enough and just shut this down. But no, we were still there day in, day out. Dr. Brown used his connections to keep his little experiment running. So instead of getting shut down, he put the whole wing on lockdown. No one goes in or out. He said it was for the safety of the inmates, but I figured it was just to make sure no one outside our block would hear about the weird deaths. Things in my cell were getting real weird, too. At first, it was small stuff like finding red candle wax in the sink. I tried telling myself it was all a sick, practical joke, and then one night my cell door slammed shut so fast it woke me up from the little sleep I did get. But that was impossible. We were locked in every night, and I didn't go back to sleep after that. The next morning, I found scorch marks on the edge of my blanket the day after that. I found claw marks on my walls. They tore through the cheap paint and concrete as neatly as a knife cutting through butter. They looked like scratches, too big and too deep to be from anything human. And of course, the guards blamed me for it. They thought I was acting out or something. They thought I must have some sort of weapon on me that made those scratches, or that I was hiding contraband when I scorched my blanket. So after the first time they raided my cell, I tried to clean up anything that looked out of place before my guards swung by. We were 4 months into the experiment. Now I could see Dr. Brown lose his grip as the weeks wore on. They kept upping my dose, but it still wasn't doing anything good for me. My sleep paralysis nightmares just kept getting worse. The doc would look at me like I was ruining his experiment on purpose, as if I wanted any of this. The murders didn't stop either. The block was in a state of constant fear. Everyone was waiting for the next hit, wondering who it would be. But no matter how hard the guards looked or how many questions they asked, they found nothing. As for me, it was like I was fading. I could feel myself getting weaker bit by bit. The guys running the experiment, they didn't really know what to do about it. All they could figure to do was hook me to N4 drip, pumping who knows what into me. Doc Brown wouldn't let anyone take me to the prison clinic, never mind to an actual hospital. He said it might mess with the experiment and the nightmares. They were ramping up. It was making my waking hours just as bad as the ones I spent in the dark. Dr. Brown wasn't holding up much better. You could see the way his eyes were cracking around edges. His cool, collected demeanor was slipping away day by day, but instead of backing off, he doubled down. He was obsessed with keeping the experiment going for as long as he could. It was like he lost sight of why he started it in the first place. By the middle of the 5th month, I could barely get out of bed on my own. I could barely stand up to take a piss. I knew the experiment was only supposed to run for 6 months, but by that point, I wasn't sure I'd even make it to the end. The doc came into my room for our weekly psych check. He was fuming, blaming me for all the issues with the experiment. According to him, this was supposed to be my shot at redemption. But there I was, screwing it all up. His words, not mine. And then he pulled out the biggest syringe I have ever seen. "We're going to make this work, Ted, whether you're on board or not," he said. And before I could even think of a comeback, he jammed the thing into my arm and plunged down. Everything after that's a blur. I remember a cold rush flowing through my veins. The room started spinning. And that's it. Lights out. I blacked out completely. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I woke up, everything around me was pure chaos. I heard shouting and banging outside my cell. It sounded like the world was ending. I heard inmates yelling and running, trying to get out of the block. Gunfire would start up, only to be cut off by a terrified scream. It was obvious that whatever was happening out there, people were getting slaughtered. And then, out of nowhere, Dr. Brown burst into my cell. He looked even more unhinged than usual. He started shaking me, trying to get me to wake up. But you see, after what he gave me, I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. I was fully awake, but it was sleep paralysis. It's like it followed me to the waking world. "Ted, you have to snap out of it. You must face this monster," he said. But I couldn't do anything. I was stuck in my body. I could just listen to the chaos outside. All I could do was stare into Doc Brown's wild, desperate eyes, and as he shook me by the shoulders, I saw Candleface come into my cell. The entire room went dark, like we'd been swallowed up by a black hole. The only light I could see was from the candle he was holding. I don't know how, but I could feel its warmth all the way from my bunk. Thick red wax dripped down from his fist and spattered the floor, and this whole time his face was melting and shifting. I could see Doc Brown turn pale in the candlelight. The sweat running down his forehead made it look like he was melting too. He turned to Candleface and he pointed at me. "Take him, not me. Take Ted, please God, take him, not me." He begged, his voice cracking with fear. I'd never seen him so terrified. I was shaking, but I couldn't do anything but watch. Candleface paused then. And then he gave me a long look, and then, without a word, he turned and looked at Doc Brown. I saw him place a hand around his throat and yank him away from me. I could only see what happened next out of the corner of my eye. Candleface lifted the doc up by his throat. I could hear him choking. And then slowly, deliberately, Candleface brings up the candle to Doc Brown. The smell of burning skin fills the air as the doc screams. The next few seconds are a blur. Blood sprayed the walls. And then Doc Brown screams. Just stop. All at once, cut off mid-breath, and I'm just lying there, knowing that I'm next. Then Candleface turned to me, and it felt like time just stopped in this godforsaken place, trapped with this thing. I couldn't even beg like Brown did, but Candleface didn't move. He just stared at me. It was like he was looking right into me, seeing everything I am, everything I've been. And for a moment, I swear, it felt like he was really thinking, really considering whether I was next. He walked closer, and then a voice as deep and rough as gravel said a single word: favor. He placed the candle he's always holding into my hand. His flesh was as hot as fire when he touched me. It burned my palm hard enough that I heard a sizzling noise. And then he stood up and he just left. He walked out like he was all done there. I was left alone with Dr. Brown, or what was left of him. After what felt like forever, the drugs finally wore off enough for me to move. My whole body felt like it went through a grinder. I pushed myself up and I shuffled out of my cell. Everyone was dead. The inmates, the guards who enjoyed their kicks a bit too much, even the researchers were all dead. It was like Candleface cleared the path just for me. I walked to the end of my wing, expecting the rest of the prison guards to ambush me, but no one did. The doors were hanging wide open, all waiting for me to just waltz through. I walked slowly through the prison, holding that candle close to my chest. With each step, I could feel a bit more of my strength returning. I never saw another living soul. Everywhere I looked was a mess of ashes, bodies, and blood. Guns were scattered around, covered in wax. I looked up and saw that even the security cameras were messed up. The sight of it all made me sick, but at the back of my head was a faint glimmer of hope. No one would know what happened here. All anyone would see was a prison riot turned into a weird massacre. Nobody would know that I had somehow survived and just walked out. But the carnage did get to me in the end. I was right by the prison entrance when I just lost it. Everything in my stomach came up. And then as soon as I stopped heaving, I bolted and I didn't look back. I just ran into the night, holding on to that candle like it was my lifeline. I ended up halfway across the country after that. I found a job working nights at a gas station in the middle of nowhere. The owners didn't ask me about my past. They just saw a scrawny kid down on his luck, and they decided to help me. The job didn't pay much, but I was just happy for the chance. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I don't experience sleep paralysis anymore either. That should be a good thing, right? But I don't get much sleep these days either. I'm now a fully fledged insomniac. I don't know if that was Doc Brown's miracle drug, but I'm not going to complain too much. Because even when I don't get much sleep, I feel great. Almost better than I've felt my whole life. Most nights there's just me and the radio. I keep my ears open for any news about the prison or Dr. Brown, but there's nothing. I guess whoever was in charge of the operation wanted to keep the whole thing under wraps. But if any of those people ever start looking for me, I got my candle ready. If I ever need a favor, I know exactly who to ask. I work in a grocery store. I'm not going to say the name for privacy, but it is a large one located next to a highway exit. It can get pretty crowded afternoons and evenings when all the drivers decide to buy something on their way home from work. It is really hectic between 4 o'clock and 6 p.m. During those 2 hours, it's almost impossible to navigate through the store. All the customers create a stream of people from the entrance to the cash register. No matter how hard you try to fight it, you will get swept away by the stream, and the stream can be terrifying. I remember when I first started this job, my boss told me to be sure to finish up whatever I was doing before 4 p.m. At the time, I thought it was just an old guy telling a team to work faster. I was 18 then when I first started here, so I didn't listen. I stayed in the tomato sauce aisle, refilling the shelves. At first, I didn't notice anything different. More customers started coming in, but it didn't worry me. Customers are good for business, so I was glad the store was doing well. And then it started to get crowded. No matter how hard I tried to move out of the way, I had to keep apologizing for accidentally bumping into people. And then customers started pouring into the store. I realized too late the danger I'd gotten myself into. I was pushed up against the sauce shelf. One of the glass jars fell and shattered on the floor, but no one moved away. I tried to pick up the pieces of glass, but it was impossible. The store was filled and everyone was in a hurry to get home. Their march towards the register could not be stopped, and my only choice was to follow the rules. Thankfully, I'm pretty tall. It lessened the risk of me falling and being crushed. It was still very uncomfortable with how tight people were packed around corners. There were people constantly pressing against me, trying to get to the register. There were times people were so packed together I was afraid that they would suffocate me, but thankfully that didn't happen. As soon as the mass reached the cash registers, the pressure lessened and I was able to get away. Afterwards, I spoke to my boss about the risks this massive crowd could cause. He kept assuring me that it was safe. So far, there has never been an accident. I tried to say that wasn't exactly a safety guarantee, but none of the other employees were bothered by the crowds. It became clear I was fighting a losing battle, and I decided to keep my mouth shut. And that's how I learned about this grocery store's list of rules. Number 1, stay out of the aisles during rush hour. Number 2, keep every register open to allow for a faster flow of customers. Number 3, no small talk with customers during rush hour. And number 4, stay hydrated. Now all these rules make sense. No small talk because it would hold up the line, making the wait longer in some cases. I'd even seen customers get annoyed at one another for talking and holding up the line. Essentially, the only thing you want to hear is the sound of cashiers clicking away at their registers and footsteps leaving the store. And the stay hydrated rule might sound obvious, but trust me, when you're in that hectic environment, you are thankful for every drop of water you can get. My boss loved telling us a story about how one employee ended up fainting because she forgot to drink her water. Rush hour shifts were the worst. It was hectic, repetitive, and painful. Whenever rush hour was over, everyone who had been working the registers took a break just to rest their hands. The worst part about it was that working during rush hour didn't give you extra money. Management did the bare minimum of ensuring that no one worked during rush hour 2 days in a row, but that didn't solve anything. And I tried to come up with solutions, but no one wanted to hear it. This was the way they'd always done it, and they weren't going to change their ways. The only one who always escaped rush hour was Claire, who worked the night shift. While most customers visit during rush hour, there are people coming in all times, even at night. Because of this, the store is open 24/7 to accommodate travelers at all times. To be honest, when I first started, I wanted to work the night shift. After experiencing the hell that was rush hour, I was hoping not to work for those 2 hours. I tried to convince my boss, saying that since I was fresh out of high school, without any other responsibilities, the night shift would be perfect for me. I could sleep all day and work at night besides. That was kind of my ideal sleeping schedule anyway. When I told the boss, he just laughed. I thought I was joking. And since my first attempt didn't work, I tried a new strategy. Store security. Claire was a petite middle-aged woman with ponytails and buck teeth her face never grew into. At a quick glance, she could be mistaken for a middle school student, and she was about as threatening as a chihuahua. If someone entered the store with nefarious intent, she wouldn't be able to protect anything. I, on the other hand, was a young man, quite tall and in pretty good physical shape. And out of the two of us, I would be the more intimidating one for sure. However, when I pointed this out to my boss, he just looked me up and down and gave me a tired sigh. That's not what the night shift is about, he said. I tried to protest, but he shot me down with further explanation. Afterward, I asked the other employees about the night shift, and I found out Claire had been working those hours since the store first opened about 20 years ago. There was a guy named Paul who tried to cover the night shift once, but apparently he had a mental breakdown and quit a few days later. The other employees joked about the night shift being cursed, and my days working in a grocery store continued. Despite the awful rush hour, there were no other jobs close by, so I was stuck. I mean, at least the other employees were nice, and eventually, I did get used to it. And then one day I came in to find the boss in a panic. Claire had collapsed and had been rushed to the hospital. Thankfully, it didn't sound life-threatening, but she would still have to spend the night in the hospital, meaning someone else would have to take her shift. Our boss went to everybody frantically, asking if anyone would be willing to work that night. I don't think my fellow employees are superstitious, but they'd all joked about the night shift being cursed. Nobody wanted to take that shift except me. I volunteered. Mister. The boss looked at me and hesitated. Another employee suggested keeping the store closed during Claire's shift till she returned, but for some reason our boss found that unacceptable and reluctantly. He gave me the night shift, so I got the rest of the day off the afternoon and evening so I could go back home and rest. I took a nap, ate some food, played some video games until it was time for me to return to the store at 10 p.m. When I exited my car that evening in the store's parking lot, I inhaled the cold night air, and I realized I was full of energy. My nerves were jittery from anticipation. I would finally be able to witness the night shift for myself. I arrived about 20 minutes before the shift started. I expected my boss or someone else to be there, maybe to tell me what I was expected to do, but there was no one there. Strike that. There was one person there, Theo, who worked the shift before mine. He handed me a sealed envelope. It was light and it felt almost empty. I asked what it was or what was in it, but Theo just shrugged. He told me the boss had been there earlier and dropped off the envelope he wanted me to have. I opened it and I saw it contained a single piece of paper that was some kind of checklist or rules for Claire's shift. I decided to read it after I'd changed into my work clothes. Theo's shift came to an end, and before he left, I asked if there was anything particular I should know. It there had been any problems during the day or evening. But no, Theo said it had been a regular day. As far as he knew, my night shift would be easy. He jokingly told me not to fall asleep from boredom and then wished me luck before leaving. I laughed along with him, but after he left, I felt the emptiness of the store begin to put me on edge. During the day, it's like any other grocery store. It is brightly lit with both customers and employees walking around, creating this background noise, always letting you know that somebody else is there. But during the night shift, the lights are dim. Our boss thought having all the lights on all the time was a waste of money. So the night shift is only allowed the bare minimum, as it's the time with the fewest customers and there was no background noise. At the start of the shift, I was the only one there. And as I walked through the aisles with their tall shelves casting tall shadows around me, the only sound was my footsteps echoing through the store. Somewhere in my gut, I felt anxiety. It said I'd made a huge mistake and I needed to get out of there, but I shut that voice down. I hadn't even been alone for 5 minutes, and I already wanted to leave. Come on, man, that is pathetic. Why would I lose my nerve just because I was alone in some dark, empty store? Not to mention I'd asked for the shift. What would everybody say if I just walked out? No matter what happened, I would see this through to the end. So I sat down at the cash register. It was the only part of the store with good lighting. I spun around a few times in a swivel chair, wondering how I would spend my time. And then I remembered I still hadn't checked the list, and I pulled it from my pocket. There were a total of 6 rules for me to follow. Number 1. Stay by the cash register. No matter what happens, don't leave the register area until the shift is over. If a customer needs your help, tell them to come to you. Number 2. Do not go into storage. Keep the door locked until the night shift is over at 6 a.m. Do not open it even if a customer claims to desperately need something. Never ever open, or God forbid, enter the storage. Number 3. If there are sounds of stuff falling from shelves and breaking, ignore them. It's just the critters trying to lure you away. Number 4. At midnight, Barbara will enter the store. She is an older lady wearing a raincoat. She will need assistance the entire way. Let her hold onto your arm and lead her through every aisle of the store. If she shows interest in any product, stop and let her put it in her bag. Do not talk to her and do not look at her face. Number 5. Sometimes a customer who is crying comes in. They change their appearance between visits. So be wary of every customer who looks like they're about to burst into tears. Only let them see your business smile. Don't show any other expressions. And don't listen when they try to tell you why they're crying. Tell them to have a good night and send them on their way. Number 6. If music starts playing on the store's radio, let it be. Even if the music is loud and it gets on your nerves, just leave it. The thing that plays the music is dangerous, and it's not worth the trouble. Okay, I read through the rules twice and scratched my head. On one hand, it seemed like they wanted me to just sit behind the cash register and not do anything for the entire shift. But they also wanted me to help this Barbara character walk through the store, which would break the first rule. I concluded the Barbara rule must be the exception, meaning the list could be boiled down to never ever leave the register unless you're helping Barbara. And with the rules sorted out, I made myself comfortable on the chair by the register. It was time for my shift to start. The night shift was a lot more boring than I thought it'd be. I knew there wouldn't be many customers, but there had never been a single one for an hour. All I did was spin around in my chair and play games on my phone. We weren't supposed to use our phones during work hours, but since I was the only one in the store, I assumed it would be fine as long as I put it away before someone came in. The phone had saved me from death by boredom, but if nothing happened soon, it would run out of batteries before I was halfway done with the shift. I did have a charger with me, but it was in my bag in the changing room, all the way on the other side of the building. I would have to break the rules to go and get it, which was a tempting thought, but I wasn't going to break those rules an hour into the shift. All I could do was play around with my phone until the battery died, and then hope the rest of the shift went quickly. It was past 11 p.m. when the first customer arrived. It was a young guy around my age, maybe a little bit older. He went straight for the cleaning products aisle. I tried to keep track of where he was, but it was difficult. It was difficult since the tall shelves blocked my view. I could hear him moving around, picking up products, and putting them back again. This continued for a bit until he abruptly stopped, and then the man stepped out from the aisle and started toward me, and then he asked for a specific brand of glass polish. This question caught me off guard, and I wasn't able to answer right away. It was like my tongue had gotten stuck in my mouth. The guy had to repeat his question before I could collect myself and give an answer. I told him all the cleaning products were in aisle 7, and if he couldn't find a product, then we didn't have it. The man was not happy with this answer. He wanted me to go and check to see if there was any in storage, and I was just about to leave my post. When I remembered the rules, I had to stay by the cash register. I apologized, and I did my best to explain that I couldn't leave the register unattended. He got furious, but thankfully not violent. And then he just stormed out. And that was my first customer of the night. Not a great start, but certainly not the end of the world. The second customer came in around midnight. I heard the doors open and close, and then nothing, no footsteps or anything. It was as if someone had entered and then stopped right by the door. I looked up from my phone, the entryway barely visible from the register. There was someone standing there, a short figure in a raincoat. Both the timing and description matched. So it had to be Barbara. I got up from the register and walked toward her through the dark aisles. I moved fast, partly because I didn't want her to have to wait, and partly because being alone in this dim light made me uncomfortable. I don't know how to put it, but I felt like something was lurking behind every shelf, ready to jump out at me if I stopped moving. And this feeling didn't go away until I stood next to Barbara. It was like there was this safe zone around her. Barbara was dressed in an oversized raincoat with a hood that covered her face. I was about to introduce myself, but I stopped before I said a word. The rules said not to talk or to look at her face. Just help her walk through the store. I wondered if it was because she was an old lady that had lost her hearing. As instructed, I held out my arm for her to hold on to, and her fingers dug into my arm like fishing hooks. I knew old people sometimes could have vice-like grips, but this was another level. Her fingers were like carved stone with a thin layer of skin stretched over it. I did my best not to think about that. The faster I could help her through the store, the faster she would leave. So I mustered up a business smile, and I started leading her through the aisles. She walked slowly, one step at a time. Every time she put down her foot, her grip on my arm shifted, and I tried not to wince. This was going to be a long and painful walk through the store. When we got to the vegetables, she stopped. Her hooded head turned towards the cabbage. I picked up one of the cabbages and I held it out in front of her. She shook her head. I took another, but she didn't take that one either. I started thinking I may have misread her wanting cabbage, and I looked towards the carrots. However, Barbara pointed towards the cabbage, so I showed her everyone until I pulled out one cabbage that was all the way in the back. It had been squished and smudged, and it was completely soft. On top of that, as I held it, I noticed it had started to rot, but before I could throw it away, the old lady nodded. She gestured for me to put it in her basket, and I did as I was asked. The rotten head of cabbage fell into her basket with a wet plop. After that, it became pretty clear what type of produce she was after. Besides the rotten cabbage, she also picked up some expired milk, a package of crushed cookies, and a block of cheese that showed signs of mold. Even though the package said it would be good for 2 more days, the last thing she put in her basket was a candy bar. Someone must have dropped and stepped on it before putting it back on the shelf because there was still a clear shoe mark on it. When we finally reached the register and she let go of my arm, I was relieved. Barbara dumped the content of her basket at the register. I did what I could to hold back my gag reflex as I rung up the rotten cabbage and the rest. I put everything in a bag for her, but when I was moving the cabbage, I lost my grip and it tumbled onto the floor. I gave an apologetic smile, and I knelt down to pick it up. And when I raised my head, I came face to face with her. Barbara didn't have a face. Under her raincoat's hood was a hole of darkness, like an abyss sucking in the light. I looked away as fast as I could. The rules regarding Barbara echoed in my head. Do not talk to her and do not look at her face. I mean, I'd only seen her face for a second. It had been an accident, so that should be okay, right? Cold sweat poured out of me, and my movements were rigid. As I finished packing up her groceries, I stood with my back towards her. I didn't dare look in her direction for fear of accidentally seeing her lack of face again. I gave her the bag without turning around, and there was a part of me I wanted to take a second look at, just to confirm what I'd seen. I suppose you might call it my human curiosity. And then there was another. It was a more logical part, and it told me to stay away. I shouldn't get involved in whatever Barbara was a part of. She took her bag, but instead of removing it from me, her hook-like fingers gripped my hand. I yelled out at the sudden pain, but I managed to not look at her. And then she pulled me down, my head close to hers, and I shut my eyes. And then she spoke. The voice was young, almost childish. I'll let it go since it's your first time, but don't expect this mercy. A second time, and with those words she left. She let go of me, and she walked out of the store by herself, leaving me alone in the store's dim light. Compared to the time before Barbara's visit, the store was now filled with noise. There were thuds and other sounds of things falling off their shelves. Music was playing over the intercom. Some of the songs were the same as those currently playing on the radio, but there was a while it played an old 80s hit on repeat, or it only played the chorus on repeat, resulting in it getting stuck in my head. It was really quite annoying, but now I was aware of how important the rules were, and no matter how much they tried to trick me, I would not leave the register before the shift was over. 2 customers came in at different times, but they were just regular customers. The only thing of note with them was that all the sounds stopped as soon as they stepped inside. It was as if whatever was hiding in the store was only interested in me. I guess I was lucky it didn't go after customers. There was only 1 hour left of the shift, and I could see it starting to get brighter outside. There wasn't much time left now, but I still couldn't relax. There was still one rule I hadn't had to follow, or rather one specific customer that had yet to show up, the crying one. There was nothing written on the list that the crying customer came every night, so if I was lucky, they wouldn't show up at all this time, however. Just as one could expect, right as my mind started to entertain those thoughts, another customer showed up. It was clear from the outset that this customer was different from the other ones. Instead of walking around looking for what they wanted, this one went straight to me. As soon as they reached the register, they slammed a fist of money on the conveyor belt. A package of cigarettes, they said between clenched teeth. Brand doesn't matter. All the cigarettes are kept locked behind the register to prevent stealing. While I fumbled with the key, I snuck glances at the aggressive customer. They were a large middle-aged man with stubble. He was dressed like a lumberjack, but the clothes looked like they were made from plastic. His face was scrunched up in this frown-like expression. It was like he was trying to hold back tears, and I was certain then that this was the final customer from the list. I took out the cheapest pack of cigarettes we had, and I locked the cabinet again. I rang the package up while trying to remember what the rules had said about this one. The list was in my pocket, but it'd be too suspicious for me to pull it out right in front of him. Not to mention doing that. It might make the situation worse. I remembered that I was supposed to smile and not ask why they were crying, right? I could do that. I exchanged the cigarettes for money, and I made sure to keep my business smile. They thanked me, and I nodded, thinking that was the end of it. But they didn't leave. I don't know what I did wrong. Had I forgotten something? Instead of leaving, they got closer to me. Their muscles swelled, and their breath smelled like sulfur. Aren't you going to wish me well? It said and grabbed my shirt collar. What service is this? What heartless demon are you to ignore someone obviously upset? It kept ranting. I struggled, but I couldn't break free. He dragged me over the register. He pulled me towards him. The strength he had wasn't human. As I mentioned before, this customer was holding me up by one hand, and he was holding me up high enough that my feet didn't touch the floor. And then he just let me go and I fell. I crashed down on the hard stone floor. My palms got scraped, and the sudden fall knocked the wind out of me. I fumbled around, my limbs flailing as I tried to orient myself and get up from the floor. But as soon as I regained my sense of balance, a strong force pulled me down again. The customer squatted over me. He leaned in real close and spoke. His every word came with a cloud of sulfur. It was hard to breathe, and the gas made me dizzy. I could see his mouth moving, but none of his words registered in my brain. And through my haze I saw thin, sharp, like teeth between his lips. As he spoke, his tongue would glide over them, as if preparing them for a tasty meal. The mouth and the teeth got closer and closer. The heat from his breath caressed my face. There was too much sulfur. I could barely think, much less react. Whatever was about to happen, I was at his mercy. The teeth were right by my nose, and then it was gone. I was on the floor next to the register. The package of cigarettes was next to me, but no sign of the aggressive customer. "Are you alive there?" I heard a familiar voice say, and in the entryway stood my boss. As I saw him, I also noticed that all the lights were on. I looked at the time on the register computer, 536, still about half an hour left in my shift. My boss was here early. I don't remember what I answered him, but he came over and helped me up. "I got here a bit early, just to make sure you hadn't died or something." He said it as a joke, but it didn't feel like one. "Good job." He patted my shoulder then, and then he told me I could go home, which I did, and I still work at that grocery store today, but so far I have yet to take another night shift. Always listen to the flight attendants, especially when they give you a list of rules. Have you ever been in an airport after midnight? It's like being in an empty mall. You feel like you're not allowed to be there. But unlike everybody else around me, I'm actually glad I'm here. I've got something waiting for me at the end of my flight. You see, just a few hours ago, my boss dropped by my desk, telling me I need to be in LA right away. He needs to get me out there for an emergency sales pitch. "Don't worry about all the PowerPoint," he said. "The grunts would write it up for me, and he'll send it over. The only thing I need to worry about is sweet talking suits." You know, that's the thing about sales. The numbers and graphs don't really matter much because step one to closing a deal is to get people to like you. You know, get into their heads. Find the things that would make them forget. They're about to give away thousands of dollars. I was flying on some airline I'd never heard of. FTR Airlines. Must be one of those cheap ones. So I was on Flight 789, departing at 2 a.m. I was a little pissed off about the idea of spending the night in a cramped plane seat, but I also couldn't help feeling a little excited. I was closing a huge sale. It was the kind of opportunity that could change everything for me. The airport was a ghost town. My knees popped as I shuffled to my gate. There were just a handful of other passengers at this hour. Only the cheap and desperate would book this flight. That was fine with me. That means I'd have a row all to myself. I've taken so many flights that they all blurred into one long, dreary routine, so I barely glanced at the flight attendants as I made my way to my seat. That is, until one of the attendants stepped right in front of me. She was dressed in the usual dark blue uniform, but her eyes were wide open, almost bulging out of her skull, like she'd seen a ghost or something without a word. She pushed a crumpled piece of paper into my hand. Her fingers were cold, and she looked at me with such intensity that it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I wanted to ask her if something was wrong, but she'd already begun to walk away. Watching her move down the aisle with that customer service smile fixed on her face, I shook my head. Must be some new safety pamphlet or a feedback form. You know, they always want to know if you enjoyed your flight, as if anyone enjoys flying in these metal tubes. I found my seat and I slumped into it. I was exhausted. The excitement from the sale was wearing off. I shifted in my seat to get comfortable, and that's when I remembered what the attendant gave me as I unfolded it. I braced myself for the usual spiel about buckling my seatbelt or how to put on a life vest, as if I hadn't heard those instructions 1,000 times before. But no, this was different. Instead, I found a list of rules scribbled on a page torn from a notebook. The ink was slightly smudged, making it clear it was written in a rush, and each rule was weirder than the last. Rule number 1, do not look out the window from 3 a.m. to 3:45 a.m. Number 2, do not accept drinks from the flight attendant wearing red number 3. If you hear a baby crying in the bathroom, alert the flight attendant's number 4, change seats if someone leaves a briefcase next to yours. Number 5, do not talk to any other passengers, and number 6, drink the soda at the end of the flight. I blinked while reading it again. Was this some kind of prank? My tired brain couldn't wrap itself around what I was seeing. I glanced around looking for a camera crew, but everyone was settling into the flight like usual. The attendant who gave me the note was busy helping an older couple to their seats. Any sign of the fear she'd shown me when I boarded was completely gone. I was confused, but too exhausted to think about it much. I just wanted to get some sleep before I got to LA, so I shoved the note into my pocket and I got ready for takeoff. The engines roared to life, and the plane rolled toward the runway. This whole process all felt very familiar. I found myself going through the motions almost by memory. I buckled my seatbelt without looking, and I put my bag under my seat as the plane picked up speed. A little while later, the plane's hum became a familiar drone. I began to zone out as the city lights flew by. It was then that a flight attendant with a card appeared beside me. The first thing I noticed was how perky her smile was for such a late hour. "Anything to drink, sir?" "We have water, coffee, tea, anything you like," she began. Her tone was chipper, almost giddy actually. I shook my head, not really interested in anything. And that's when I saw her uniform wasn't like the others. Everyone else was decked out in blue, but she was dressed in red. Her uniform looked a lot fancier too. It looked like it was made of silk. It shimmered and seemed to glow in the dim cabin light. Odd, I thought, but maybe she was special staff or something. "No, I'm good, thanks." "I was planning to get some sleep first," I said. "Oh, well, we have a fine selection of wines and spirits too, sir. Our whiskey is especially good. Here, tell you what, you can have a glass on the house, mister." "Horner," she said as she grabbed a bottle from the cart. The bottle was dark green and noticeably heavy, but it didn't have any kind of label on it. As she poured it into a glass, out came a clear golden liquid. It actually looked pretty good, but when I leaned forward to take it, I saw there were things swimming in it. Small, thin worms. If I wasn't paying attention, I wouldn't have noticed them wriggling around. My stomach turned just watching it. She pushed the glass toward me, and I almost gagged. "No thanks, I'm not thirsty," I stammered out. But her smile didn't change. "I'm trying to make this easy for you, Jack. Take the drink." I laughed nervously at that. The weird rules flashed in my head. Sorry, I really can't. I have a bad stomach from flying. You know, bad experiences. You don't know what you're in for, Jackie boy. This would make the flight go so much faster. "Drink before I crush this glass down your throat," she said. Her smile was still wide and friendly, almost serene, like she didn't really know what she was saying. The worm-like things continued to move around the drink. "Okay, but I'd like some chips to wash it down with. Can another flight attendant get me some?" I asked. For a second, her smile faltered, and her eyes seemed to darken. "Of course, sir," she finally said. She moved away, taking the cart with her. I watched her go, waiting to see her offer drinks to other passengers. But she didn't. I kept thinking back to those things, swimming in the drink. I needed a bathroom. A splash of cold water would do me good. The cabin lights were dim as I walked down the aisle. There was no sign of the red attendant anywhere. But as soon as I locked the bathroom door behind me, I heard a high-pitched crying sound. Baby's cry. It sounded so close, like it was right there with me. My head started to hurt as the cries grew louder. I bolted out of the stall, and my blood ran cold because it was quiet outside the bathroom. No crying baby out here. Not even a toddler throwing a tantrum. I moved closer to the bathroom door, and from the other side, I could hear the faint sounds of a baby crying. The rules flashed in my head again. If you hear a baby crying in the bathroom, alert the flight attendants. Heart racing. I flagged down the nearest one. "There's a baby crying in there," I said, pointing back at the bathroom door. Without a word, she signaled to the others. In no time, they all gathered by the bathroom. They were holding a bizarre collection of items: paper bags, gloves, soda, and even a pacifier. One of them noticed me lingering and hurried over. "You should return to your seat, sir. You really don't want to hear this," she said, feeling like my feet were glued to the carpet. I just stood there, trying to make sense of it all. The cries from the bathroom continued, then warped. The sounds twisted into something I could barely describe. It started to sound more like a broken toy now. It grew more mechanical until it abruptly changed into a deep-throated laughter. The attendants were scrambling now. Their movements were frantic, and their faces pale. One of them was trying to keep it together, but I could hear him gagging. Another woman with her hair tied back so tight it looked painful, the tears going down her cheeks. Her hands were shaking as she held a paper bag like it was the only thing keeping her sane. The noises from the bathroom got worse. I was hearing loud, throaty laughs coming from it now, and in between the laughter was the squeak of the baby's cry. I took a step back, then another, and in the group of terrified flight attendants was the one in red. She was standing there, a soft smile on her face as she looked at me. Walking back to my seat, my mind was racing. All the other passengers didn't even seem to notice what was going on. I could still hear whatever it was in the bathroom, but nobody else seemed to notice. Some guy across the aisle was snoring. A lady 2 rows down was flipping through a magazine. It made no sense, and as soon as I sat down, the laughing, crying sounds, they just stopped like someone turned off a recording. I needed answers, so I flagged down a flight attendant as she passed. "Hey, can you tell me what's happening here?" I asked. She paused. She looked tired, like she'd had this conversation more times than she cared to remember. I don't really know, she admitted, and something in her tone made me believe her. All I know is that one flight gets chosen every night. Chosen? I asked. Chosen for what? She glanced around, as if making sure we weren't being heard. I guess you could say, to test the passengers to see if the rules will be followed, or else we might not make it to our destination, she said. Follow the rules, I repeated dumbly. Yes, just please do what the note says. And with that, she moved on. I pulled out the crumpled list of rules from my pocket and read them again carefully. Rule number 1, do not look out the window from 3 a.m. to 3:45 a.m. I checked my watch and I saw it was almost time. I sighed before reaching over to my window. My fingers trembled slightly as I tugged the window blind shut with a quiet snap. Better to be safe than sorry, I figured, especially after everything that had happened. As 3 a.m. approached, a strange, unnerving calm settled over the cabin. I could see the attendants going down the rows to ask everyone to pull their blinds down too. One of them gave a tiny nod as she passed me by. They know what's coming. And then at exactly 3 a.m., a faint red glow began to seep around the edges of the blinds. I looked around to see if anyone else noticed, but no one seemed to be bothered at all. The cabin lights had been dim for the night, making the red glow from outside seem even brighter. I fought the urge to look outside. What the hell could be out there? And then came the sound of thunder. Or at least I hoped it was thunder. It roared and rumbled, shaking the very air around us. But this thunder, it had a rhythm, almost like the flapping of enormous wings. Wings that belonged to a creature so much bigger than the little Airbus we were on. With every clap of that thunder, I could feel the plane tilt slightly, like it was being pushed around by air currents made by wings. And then a scratching sound started up against my window, a soft, persistent noise that made my skin crawl. I was pretty sure it wasn't raindrops. It was deliberate, like something was trying to claw its way inside. I shuddered, gripping the armrest until my knuckles turned white. I counted down the minutes until 3:45. Finally, the red glow. The window began to fade and the scratching stopped. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding before carefully lifting the window blind. I didn't know what I really expected to see, but I never would have guessed I would find a photo. An old photograph taped to the outside of the window. It looked old. The edges were frayed and corners curled up like it had been handled many times before. The picture looked like it was taken years ago. It showed the cabin crew all posed in front of the plane. Each of them looked slightly younger, their smiles as crisp as their blue uniforms. The sunlight hit their faces just right, casting soft shadows that made the moment seem brighter. And off to one side was her, the attendant in red or blue now. In the picture, she looked just like the rest of them, part of the family. Her smile was friendly, warm even. Nothing like how she looked this whole flight. It made me wonder who she was and what happened to her. Because out of all the people in the photo, she was the only one with X's drawn over her eyes. I sat back, feeling more isolated than ever. I wanted to block it all out. I rubbed my fingers over my eyes in exhaustion, but then came this shuffling sound right next to me. I froze, remembering the rule about not talking to other passengers. I was determined to stick to the rules now no matter what, but something kept nudging at my arm. It was insistent, like someone really wanted to get my attention. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I looked down, and there it was, a man's finger tapping at my arm. but he nudged me in weird swaying motions. He'd wiggle his fingers side to side before doing a couple taps. It was so strange that my brain took a few seconds to catch up with what my eyes were actually seeing. It was a neatly trimmed finger, but it wasn't connected to a hand. Instead, it extended beyond the second knuckle into one long tube of flesh, and it stretched all the way back to a briefcase next to my seat. The briefcase itself was nothing special, just your average battered-looking piece of luggage. It was slightly open, but I couldn't see what was inside. A thin golden liquid leaked out of it. It looked like what the red attendant wanted me to drink earlier. Just the sight of it again made my stomach churn from the briefcase's opening. Came a soft shuffling noise, and then, as if the situation couldn't get any more messed up, a second finger joined the first. I could see the nail poking out first before the rest of it followed. It slithered out, slow and deliberate. It looked like a snake coming out of it whole, and it made its way towards me. Both fingers, with their flesh stretching back into the darkness of the briefcase, tapped and prodded at the air near me, as if searching for something. It was like something out of a twisted nightmare. I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. The part of my brain that screamed for logic and reason struggled to make sense of it all. And then I felt a sharp pain on my arm. It snapped me back to my senses. I looked down, and I saw that the first finger had somehow grown a sharp, dagger-like nail. It had stabbed me hard enough to draw blood. A drop of it landed on the finger, and it was like the briefcase, or whatever was inside it, got excited. The second finger, which had been slowly inching out, suddenly picked up pace, and as it did, also started growing a sharp nail like the first. As I watched, more fingers started poking out from the briefcase. They wriggled and squirmed like a nest of snakes. Each one sprouted a sharp nail as it came at me. There were a lot of them, way more than the usual 10 that belonged to any one person, all of them sliding and twisting around each other. I couldn't tell if they were all part of one single monstrous entity, or if each finger was its own creature. The sight was enough to kick my instincts into overdrive, and I jumped out of my seat. That's when a flight attendant approached. Her expression was tired but unsurprised, as if she'd seen this kind of thing before. "Let's get you to a new seat," she said politely. Her tone was calm but filled with urgency. It was obvious she knew more about the situation than I did, and at that moment I listened to her. As we walked away, I took one last look back at my seat. The fingers were still squirming out of the briefcase, more violently now. As if they were angry, I'd gotten away. Getting moved to the back of the plane, it felt like stepping into a different scene. Around me, life went on as if everything was normal. An old man was totally engrossed in a book, glasses slipping down his nose. In another row, 2 tourists were asleep with their sunglasses still on. Their heads gently bumped into each other as the plane moved. Nearby, a little girl rested her head on her mom's shoulder, both peacefully asleep. The attendant who guided me back here had a grim look on her face, like she was leading me to my execution. "We'll be landing soon, sir. Just a bit more, and it'll all be over. I'll bring you your carry-on," she said, and then she left. I tried to settle in, taking deep breaths to calm down, but I didn't have the chance as the flight attendant in red came by again. She had her drinks cart with her, but she looked like a mess. Her hair stuck out from under her cap, and her uniform was stained and ripped in places. But what really got my attention were her eyes. They weren't remotely human now. The whites had turned a sickly, shiny yellow, veined in a way that looked like something was squirming underneath, and her irises matched her uniform. They were a deep, bright red. Her makeup was all smeared across her face. Her nails looked wrecked, as if she'd been clawing at something or someone. "Why are you doing this?" I couldn't help but ask her. Her voice was still the same friendly tone, but hearing her speak, it made me very uncomfortable. "I like collecting souvenirs, Jackie boy. This one's about to give out." She giggled while she pointed to herself. She poured me another drink. It was the same bottle she took out earlier. This time, she filled the glass to the brim. As she did, I remembered what the other attendant said. "We'll be landing soon." I knew what I needed to do. If I could just stall a bit longer, maybe I'd make it through this flight without breaking any rules. It was a good thing then that my job was all about getting people to talk. So about that photo outside on the window, I started. "Who's the woman who looks just like you?" She paused at that, her smile fading slightly. I don't bother with human names, mister. Horner, she replied. But I noticed her eyes beginning to twitch for just a few seconds. I saw them turn into a normal shade of blue before turning red again. Well, what's with all these rules then? I pushed, watching her closely. She hesitated, then said the airline made a deal. That's all you need to know. I could see her patience was wearing thin. Blood started foaming at the corners of her mouth. She struggled to keep smiling, but there was a hint of desperation on her face. Now she shoved the glass at me, while her other hand started fidgeting with her hair. Take it, mister. Horner, or you'll force my hand, she said as she ripped out a fistful of her hair. I leaned back, feeling a glimmer of hope. I had a hunch about her, and I was willing to gamble on it. You should be more careful with your souvenirs. You wouldn't want to damage it even more, would you? I said as I pointed at the clump of hair in her fist. I leaned towards her. You can't actually make me break the rules, can you? She responded with a growl. No, I can't. But there are ways you talk about a big game, Jack Horner. But do you have the guts to watch the things I could do to her? Her eyes rolled back into her head. They were a soft shade of blue. Her expression shifted, and in that moment she looked like an innocent, frightened young woman. Tears started running down her face. Please, sir, I'm scared, she whispered, and then her head snapped back as if she'd been hit. When she looked at me again, her eyes were a bloody red. She smiled before pointing a finger at her face. She moved the glass closer to me. As she lightly pressed the finger to the corner of her eye, I knew what she was implying, and the thought of it made me sick. But right then, the captain announced we were starting our descent, and the timing could not have been better. Oh well, looks like you better store that card away now. Because rules are rules, I said. I hoped I sounded braver than I felt. She snarled at me, revealing long, jagged teeth. Looking into her mouth, I could see more of those finger things crawling up her throat. She raised the glass up and smashed it on the floor in a fit. The golden liquid seeped into the carpet before just evaporating. The glass scattered around us, and then began to melt like it was made of ice. I watched the shards melt into the floor, and when I looked back up, the red attendant was gone. I looked around for her, but all I could see were the other passengers waking up and getting ready to land. I was buckling myself in two, when an attendant pulled up with another drinks cart. She was dressed in a normal blue uniform. This time she looked tired but relieved as she took out a can of Coke. She popped it open, poured it into a cup, and handed it over with a weary but genuine smile. This one's on the house, she said. Her voice is low but kind. And then almost under her breath, congratulations on making it to the end. And that's when I remembered the last rule. Drink the soda at the end of the flight. Nodding, I accepted the drink, and it was the best damn Coke I've ever tasted in my life. The familiar, sugary taste ground me back to reality. It was exactly what I needed. I watched her as she moved down the aisle, reminding everyone about seat belts and tray tables. And soon enough, the plane landed with the usual thud down the runway. Everything went as smoothly as it always had. As I stepped off the plane, I could feel each flight attendant watching me. We'd all been in this together, I thought, checking out and getting my luggage. It was a blur more than anything. I just wanted to get some sleep. I didn't even bother unpacking when I got to the hotel. All I needed was to get my charger out of my bag and plug my phone in. But as I opened up my case, I saw a crisp white envelope sitting right on top of my clothes. Inside was a note written on the airline stationery. They were thanking me for being such a good passenger, and that's when I noticed their full name. FTR Airlines. It stood to follow the rules. And along with a note was another plane ticket. For hundreds of years, there's been rumors of vampires living among us. But what would you do if you actually met one? If you ever meet Robert Marsh, well, consider yourself lucky, because while he is still a vampire, there are much more evil fangs out there. Here's the story. Laura was a lovely young fawn. She was bright-eyed, intelligent, and destined for a lifetime of success. I wish I could have spent more time with her, but romance is something that has never worked out for me. There could never be any future between us. She had her whole life ahead of her and ambitions to pursue, while I was staring down the barrel of eternity, knowing that there was nothing ahead of me. My life was lived solely in the moment, with no thought wasted on either the past or the empty potential of the future. Yet despite our innate incompatibility, I didn't decline her advances that evening, and for that I feel an immeasurable guilt. Perhaps I could have simply taken what I needed in a quiet corner and left her to recover. But she was young and wild. She wanted to take me for a ride, and I felt inclined to let her do so. We went bar hopping that night, trying all sorts of liquors and cocktails. I held mine far better than she held hers, and I made a point to keep an eye on her to ensure that she didn't take things too far. Before the clock struck midnight, I implored her to slow down and switch to water. She'd sobered up a little bit by the time she invited me back to her place around 3 hours later. Naturally, I declined at first, not wanting to take advantage. We were both still quite drunk, but with her lips on mine and her arms around me. She impressed upon me that she was very much interested in me, so I gave in and spent the night with her. And what a night it was in our afterglow. I held her close. She drifted off into a deep sleep in my arms. I could feel the blood coursing through her veins, and I gently brushed the dark hair off her shoulder before sinking my teeth into her soft, unbroken skin. Young blood. It is always so much more satisfying. I drank as much as I could without harming her, and while she lay asleep beside me, I cared for her and wrapped her wound before I slipped out for the morning. When she awoke, she would likely attribute her new injury to some accident she'd had while drinking. We would almost certainly never see each other again, and if we did, I doubt she remembered much about me through the haze of drunken memories from that wonderful night. Vampirism has not been something I've particularly enjoyed. I suppose that besides immortality, there is the benefit of having seen the stranger aspects of the world. I've been acquainted with mermaids, fae, and supernatural entities, both good and evil. I've seen parts of the world that no mortal I was ever meant to see, and I know secrets that mankind is not meant to know. And I did all of this long before my current employers hired me to protect the unsuspecting world from the more dreadful things that lurk in its dark corners. Yet my days and nights repeat themselves as I march dreadfully onwards towards some unknown oblivion. My many names are lost to history over and over again. Right now, my name is Robert Marsh, although in 20 years my name will be something else. I am a vampire, albeit unwillingly so. And despite the parasitic nature of my ceaseless existence, I do try and contribute to the betterment of the world around me. And it was my efforts to contribute that led to the phone buzzing as I left Laura's house that morning. I answered it as soon as I saw who was calling. A call from Detective Rick Davis is something that I know better than to ignore. Even if I'd known where that call would soon lead me, I still would have answered. There's no denying destiny. The hotel room was a mess, but that was hardly a surprise. Davis had waited for me by the door. He was the only other living person inside. I imagined he'd sent his associates out before I'd arrived. Best that I not mingle with them too much. Davis didn't need to say a word at first. The dead girl on the hotel bed said enough. Staring at her, I was able to piece together enough of the story to tell me just who she was. Her fishnet stockings and leather miniskirt told me she'd been a prostitute, and the injection marks on her arms told me she'd had a history with drugs. In the end, I doubted it was drugs that had killed her, though. Judging by the look on her face, the disembowelment had probably been the cause. Her stomach had been cut open vertically. Her entrails were splayed out on the bed, soaking the sheets in her blood. Despite the mess, I could tell that there were things missing, namely her kidneys and uterus. Davis stood behind me, letting me take in the details of the crime scene. He was silent for a few moments before at last he spoke up. "Third one this week," he said. "Always some doped-up hooker in a cheap hotel just like this." The room was registered to a Jeffrey Buck, considering that the last one was John Deere. Well, I got a feeling that the name won't get us anywhere. So why call me then? I asked as I looked back at Davis. If you're worried about other girls, you've got the wrong vampire. Call Eastgate. This seems more Hartman's territory than mine. I can't imagine that either myself nor my organization would be much help here anyways. Those wounds are clean, surgical. This isn't exactly supernatural. Maybe not the method, but I'm a little more concerned about the motive. With the first girl, it was her heart and liver. The last one we found had her skull very meticulously cut open. They were after her brain, and they wanted it intact, he said. Maybe a cannibal, I asked, or perhaps an organ harvest. Somehow, I don't think our Vic was walking around with much in the way of prime real estate as far as the black market is concerned, David said. Kelly Pollard. She had a record. It's exactly what you'd expect. Possession, prostitution, assault. Even without that, you can tell she wasn't exactly the picture of health before all this. I might buy that it was a cannibal if we didn't find her kidneys in the dumpster out back. Just so happens that we found the liver of the first Vic thrown away, too. My brow furrowed. David stared at me intently. You think it's a cult? I asked. Well, right now we're missing a heart, a brain, and now a uterus. Right now, our best case scenario is that he's eaten them. I want to know what our worst is. I studied the corpse again. Whoever had done this had clearly been straight to business. There hadn't been much of a struggle. They'd been strong enough to pin Kelly down and gut her alive. While she didn't seem to be the strongest woman alive, I doubted that would have been an easy feat for just one person. And a group suggested something more than just a simple cannibal as well. I'm not exactly the expert on occult rituals, detective, I said. There's an endless list of things you can summon with human organs, especially the 3 that were taken. Let's say this was a cult. Whatever they're up to can't be good. I think I can safely say that whatever they could let out, it's not exactly something we'd want unleashed. I'm talking about a Class 4, maybe even a Class 5 entity. Class 5? Davis asked, his eyebrow raised. English, Marsh. Apocalyptic at worst, I said. Anything Class 4 and over, generally, has the potential to end society as we know it. Class 5 is a guaranteed existential threat. They're almost always physical gods, although as for exactly what they could try and summon, I'm not really sure, I said. Would this help at all? He asked. He reached into his jacket, taking out a manila envelope. He offered it to me, and I snatched it out of his hand. I opened the envelope and took a look at the pictures inside. They were from another hotel room with another dead girl. Judging by the damage to her chest, I assumed it was the first victim. However, in this picture, it was clear that something had been painted on the ceiling, a strange circle with a twisted symbol inside of it. It wasn't a symbol I recognized. That was at the first crime scene, Davis said as I studied the picture. We saw something similar a few blocks away from the second murder. I leafed through the pictures to see what he meant about the second symbol. Do you find anything near here? I asked. Not yet, but I think we will, he replied. No bells, I take it. No, but I have an associate I can run this by. A fee. They're generally better versed in these things. All right, do it. I'll let you know what we dig up, Davis said. His phone buzzed, and he looked down at it before letting out a satisfied huff. One of the boys got access to the camera in the lobby. You feel like joining me for a look? Matter of fact, I replied. I looked away from the body on the bed. Lead the way, detective. Davis shooed some of his other officers out of the hotel security room as we entered. I caught a few of them giving me curious glances that I didn't return. One of the hotel's employees had queued up the video by the time we'd arrived. Davis gestured for him to leave when we were both inside, and the employee did so quietly. As soon as we were alone, the detective played the video. I could see various figures moving around the lobby, but only one of them was familiar. Kelly Pollard was waiting in the lobby, very much alive. The timestamp suggested that this had taken place around 8 p.m. the night before. Davis glanced at me to confirm that I saw her too. My attention remained fixated on Pollard. Jeffrey Buck, I said. You didn't happen to get a description of him, did you? Sure. Short brown hair, brown eyes, Caucasian. Sound familiar? I laughed humorlessly. That description would have fit either of us. God only knew how many people on the screen had that look. Then I saw someone approach Pollard. My eyes narrowed as I watched them. They sure as hell weren't Jeffrey Buck, but I still recognized them. Davis looked over at me again as he saw my eyes narrow. What is it? He asked. I watched as the new woman on the screen spoke to Pollard. Unlike Pollard's fairly trashy attire, the newcomer wore a lovely evening dress. I couldn't tell the color on the black and white recording. Something dark. I watched as she took Pollard's hand and coaxed her towards the elevator, no doubt leading her up to the room where she'd meet her fate. "Are there cameras in the upstairs halls?" I asked. "None," Davis said. "Looks like a bit of an oversight, if you ask me, although this place isn't exactly reputable." "What did you see?" Davis asked. "That woman who came up to Pollard." "You recognized her?" "Yeah, I recognize her," I replied. "I've dealt with her before." "Really? So what? What is she? Werewolf? Another siren, maybe?" "Human," I replied, "but not the sort who I'd imagine would be getting involved in something like this. I'm gonna need about 48 hours, detective." "Can you give me that? 48 hours? It's asking a lot, Marsh. What you gonna do?" "My investigation. I'll send you whatever intel I get on that symbol, anything I can get from the girl. All I ask is that you leave her to me. If she's involved, she's not the one in charge, but maybe she can tell me who is." Davis didn't look satisfied with my request, but after a few moments, he sighed. "Oh, fine, do what you gotta do," he said. "But after 48 hours, I'm going after that girl if I don't have anything in 48 hours. "I'll give her to you myself," I replied. Davis and I traded a nod before I left the hotel and stepped out into the morning sun. Many people believe that sunlight kills vampires. It does not, but our bodies are more attuned to the night. The daylight is almost blinding to us, and it dulls our senses. I returned home to my cozy little apartment after I left the hotel, and after a little bit of digging to make sure I still had the address, I turned in for a short rest. It'd be better to contact her in the evening anyways. My rest was not an idle one, though. The photograph of the occult markings that Davis had found were emailed to a colleague of mine, a siren by the name of Jody West. Most sirens are decent enough people. They're herbivores, much like vampires, although they're primarily amphibious and have a closer relation to mermaids. Unlike mermaids, however, they are complete monsters. Jody and I had a decent enough relationship, and the girl knew more about Fae and the occult than most. It wasn't less than an hour after I'd emailed Jody that I got a phone call in response. "Mar, is she there?" I recognized Jody's voice immediately. Physically, yes. Mentally, who knows? I replied. "You got something, I take it?" "I do. You said that the local PD found these at a couple crime scenes, right? I'm guessing there were missing organs as well." Well, how'd you know?" I asked. "So what terrible thing is someone trying to bring into the world this time, to be honest? I'm not exactly sure. This is some high-level shit, though. I mean high-level. We're probably looking at an attempt to summon a Class 5. My brow furrowed. I've been afraid of that. I'm guessing you don't know which. There haven't been many documented attempts to summon any Class 5 entities in the past 50 years. People generally know to steer clear of them. If I had a bit more info, maybe I might be able to get you something." "What organs were missing from the victims?" "Brain, heart, and uterus so far," I replied, and Jody seemed to think for a moment. "Oh, well, that might indicate some sort of rebirth entity. I'll look through some of my sources and see what comes up. Please tell me you've got more leads than this, though." "About one that looks promising," I replied. "I'll follow up on it shortly." "Well, don't drag your feet and be careful. Anyone trying to summon a Class 5 is either desperate or crazy. Both are things you don't want to mess with. Stay safe, okay?" "You too," I replied. Class 5. Shit, I rubbed my temples inside. As I recalled the face of the woman I'd seen on the screen, Della Rose, what the hell did you get yourself into? I hadn't spoken to Della in the 5 years since I'd left her. 5 years wasn't much for me, but for her, I imagine it must have felt like a lifetime. There was no malice in what I'd done. I'd loved her, but as I said before, romance is something that has never worked out for me. There's not much of a future to be had between myself and a mortal. I can't sire children in the traditional way, and most of my friends are either immortal like me or have lifespans far beyond any normal humans. I don't think she cared, though. Perhaps I was selfish, abandoning her so I wouldn't need to watch her grow old and die. I'm sure she thought I was, whatever the case. Even if we didn't regard the passage of time in the same way, returning to her apartment after all those years was difficult. I'd done my recon before I made my move. I checked to ensure she had the same address, and I'd waited until she'd returned home from work. From my car, I'd watched her walk into the apartment building before I followed her in. Yet as I knocked on the door, I felt an unfamiliar, creeping anticipation. As I waited for her to answer, as well as an irrational fear that she might not answer at all. Hearing the click of a lock and the sound of the doorknob turning strangely did nothing to ease my discomfort, nor did the familiar sight of her long ginger hair that so perfectly framed her lovely freckled face. Her piercing green eyes fixated on me, the recognition in them clear, and she did not open the door all the way for me. There was a tension in her that I immediately recognized, though if it was from discomfort at seeing me again or something else was hard to say. "What do you want, Robert?" she asked. Her tone was unwelcoming. All the same, I was offered a weak smile. "Nice to see you too, Della," I replied. "Mind if I come in?" "I do, actually," she said. "You didn't answer my question." My smile faded. "I'm here on business, I'm afraid." "Have you ever met Kelly Pollard?" The recognition in her eyes was impossible to deny. "Kelly," she said softly. She hesitated for a moment before sighing. "Yeah, I saw her just the other night." "Why?" "Someone killed her last night," I said. "Footage from the hotel puts you at the scene." Della shifted her weight uneasily. She chose her words very carefully and kept a very close eye on me. I met up with her strictly on business. When I left, she was still in the hotel room. She was alive, she said. "Strictly business," I repeated. She didn't elaborate. The implication was clear, but I didn't buy it. Della liked a great many things, but cheap prostitutes weren't one of them. "Why do you care?" she asked. "I thought your people only looked into the supernatural. Ghosts, monsters, fae, and all that. So you do know something." I interrupted. She tensed up, glaring at me. "I didn't kill her," she said. "And I don't know who did. Last time I checked, you weren't technically a cop, so why don't you get the hell out of here and leave me alone?" She tried to close the door, but I stuck my arm through to stop her. The pain of having the door slammed on my arm didn't really faze me. "Della, I'm here to help you. If you didn't kill her, then I need to know who did." She pushed my arm out of the door, and as she moved, I caught a glimpse of something in the apartment behind her. On a table, I saw some sort of sculpture. At a glance, it looked like two bulls, but I could see only their top halves. They looked like they were joined together. "I don't know," she snapped. "Now leave me alone, Robert. You made it very clear that we're done, and I'd like it to stay that way." With that, the door slammed in my face. I raised my hand to knock again, but stopped myself. She wouldn't answer. I'd gotten everything I could out of her. I sighed and turned away. The image of that sculpture stuck in my head, though, and as I returned to my car, I took out my phone to dial Jody's number. So it was two bulls joined as one, right?" Jody asked. "Just the top halves, but yes." I replied as I drove back to my place. "That sounds familiar." "Give me a SEC, okay? Right? Okay." It matches the common depiction of the god Yavuz. Can't say there's a lot of info available on him. First reference to him was on some 6,000-year-old Minoan pottery found on the island of Crete. Some people think it was an early version of the myth about the Minotaur, although when you look at actual ancient Minotaurian poetry, there's a few early ones. References to Yavuz as a malignant deity. "Minotaurian poetry?" I asked. "As in poetry, by Minotaurs, yes. Why do you sound surprised? You've never met a Minotaur?" "I have not, I admit it. They're more or less extinct nowadays, but back in the day, some people hunted them for glory. It's a real shame. They were delicious." Anyways, back on topic, I found a few other scattered references throughout a few other cultures that I think might allude to Yavuz, and none of them sound good. There's a vague summoning ritual that involves creating an icon of flesh, which would permit it to come forth and usher in something called the divergence amongst its faithful. Just what that is, the texts don't say, but considering the things required for the golem, I'm guessing that's what we're dealing with. So what else would they need for the icon? I asked. Well, they've got the heart, uterus, and one of the brains. They'll need one more brain, a host body, and two severed bull heads. The heads they can probably get without causing much of a fuss, but the second brain and the body. We're looking at two more victims, I said quietly and swore under my breath. I imagined that Della's new friend would move up the time frame of their plans once they realized I was digging around. That couldn't be allowed to happen. Thanks, Jody. I'll pass along the relevant news to my friend and the local PD. We'll find whoever's running the show here, and we'll shut it down. Good luck. I'll do a bit more digging, see if I can find anything useful. But no promises. Watch your back, Marsh. I always do. I called Davis as soon as she'd hung up. No need to hide my findings. The man deserved to know what he was up against. My friend got back to me on those symbols, I said when Davis answered. It's definitely a cult. Whoever's responsible is going to kill two more times, and soon you're going to need to move fast if you want to stop it. They'll likely use the final Vic to complete their ritual, and the results won't be good. It's always good news with you, isn't it? He murmured. I don't suppose you got any idea who's behind this. Not exactly, no, I replied. But I'll keep an eye on my lead. She wasn't exactly forthcoming with information, but I got a feeling she'll lead me to a bigger fish. I'm just going home to pick up some supplies. I'll keep you posted over the next 36 hours. All right. Well, stay safe, Marsh. I'll talk to you soon. With that, Davis hung up as well, and I was nearing my own little apartment. I didn't intend to be home for long. My plan was to get some of my equipment, swap vehicles, and have myself a good old-fashioned stakeout. Not the most exciting way to spend my time, but it has got me results in the past. I parked my car in the underground garage before taking the elevator up to my apartment. As I unlocked the door and stepped inside, I could immediately sense I wasn't alone. I mentioned already that vampires are more attuned to the night. We see better in the dark, and my waiting assailants didn't seem to realize that. An ordinary person might not have seen them lurking in the shadows of my hallway, nor would they have picked up the scent of their sweat or have heard their hearts beating. I sighed wearily as I looked into the darkness at the masked figures waiting for me. Predictably, they wore crimson robes and bull masks, all but confirming that they were the moronic servants of some malevolent entity that they'd somehow convinced themselves wasn't all that bad. Hello there, I said, and I saw them tense as they realized that I saw them hiding in the shadows, and I calmly took off my coat before rolling up my sleeves and loosening my tie. Then I turned on the dim lights of my apartment. I counted about 5 men surrounding me. Good effort, I said plainly. Now, if you don't mind, let's do this like civilized people, please. Who'd like to begin? There was an uneasy silence in the air before I got a volunteer. One man drew a hatchet and ran for me, screaming bloody murder all the while. I think I could have taken him down 500 years ago, when I was still mortal, but vampirism had given me a bit more of an edge. As he tried to swing the axe at my neck, I simply ripped it from his hands and struck him across the face with the blunt end of it. I didn't kill him, God no, but I at least left him with one hell of a concussion. With the first blood shed, the other 4 came for me at once, axes drawn. There's only one single human who has ever successfully overpowered me, and while none of these people were on her level, they were still moderately strong. Their real strength came in numbers. They swung violently and wildly. It was difficult for me to evade them. I managed to drop the first one who came for me by sidestepping him and slamming his head into my wall. The effort left me open to another assailant who buried his axe into my shoulder and spilled the precious blood I drank from Laura earlier. I spun around, catching him by the throat and smashing his body against one of the other men. The last of them also tried to come at me from behind, but this time I was ready. I caught his axe before it could touch my flesh and ruin my shirt further. Then I kicked out at him, knocking him on his ass and keeping his axe. One of the men on the floor kicked my legs out from beneath me, and I hit the ground hard. One of the men immediately climbed on top of me and raised his axe to split my skull. I had no choice but to drive the one I'd stolen into his throat. That was one man down. I could see one of his friends getting up, so I tossed the body at them before leaping to my feet. I reached back to my shoulder, where an axe was dug in deep. With a grunt of pain, I tore it free just as another one of the assailants slammed against me and sent me staggering into my living room. In the dim light of my apartment, the light from my window provided the most illumination. The assailant came for me again, swinging his axe, and on instinct, I grabbed him and tossed him aside. I hadn't intended to throw him out my window, but he went through the glass all the same and plummeted to his death below. 2 men down, 3 to go. All 3 of my assailants had their axes at the ready, and with my own stolen weapon in hand, I waited for them to come to me. They didn't disappoint. 2 of them came for me at once, simultaneously swinging their weapons in a desperate attempt to kill me. I leapt back a step. One of my attackers had left himself open, and I buried my axe in his ribs. The second man tried to swing at my head, and I caught his axe and tore my own from his soon-to-be-dead associate. I had a clean swing at his throat, and if I'd had just one more second, I would have buried the blade in his neck. Their final associate was smart enough to take advantage of my distraction, though he threw himself into the man I was grappling with and pushed us both towards my open window. As I reached the edge, I lost my footing, and before I knew it, both myself and the other man were falling. We hit the ground below hard. My body was strong enough to survive the fall, although the impact was still enough to make my world go black. I couldn't have been out more than a few minutes. My entire body ached. I was sure I'd broken a few bones, but as a consequence of my vampirism, they wouldn't stay broken for long above me. I could see my broken apartment window. No mortal could have survived that fall, and the man I'd fallen with had fared as well as expected. He was quite dead, but his blood was still fresh. I had time to sink my teeth into his throat. A drink would help me recover, and freshly dead blood, well, it was better than nothing at all. Once I'd had my fill, I picked myself up and shambled to safety. As far as I could tell, no one was on their way to confirm my death, but I didn't want to linger for long. No doubt the police would arrive soon, and being in the vicinity of 4 dead bodies would be an unfortunate setback that I could not afford. The sky was dark. I needed to find Della, and I needed to do it fast. By the time I'd made it back to her apartment, I was too late. I found a post in an alley across the street from where she lived, where I could rest without being seen, and then I watched and waited. I'd hoped I'd catch her leaving. Instead, I caught her returning. It wasn't more than an hour after I'd gotten there that I saw a red sedan dropping her off out front. Della's hair looked more disheveled than normal. Even across the street, I could smell the blood on her. There had been another victim. I was sure of it. She paused as she stepped out of the sedan and looked back towards the driver's seat. Through the noise, I could hear a deep voice speaking to her. "Be ready. The divergence comes tomorrow night," the voice said. "The Wanderlust Hotel, room 130. Be prepared." Of course, Joshua Dellis said. I awaited eagerly. With that, the sedan drove off and she scurried off into her apartment. I watched her quietly before slumping against the wall of the alley, the Wanderlust Hotel. That was where the final ritual would take place. No doubt Joshua and his little cult thought I was dead. That was good. They wouldn't be expecting me to be waiting at the hotel, and I'd have a full day to heal from my injuries. Perfect. It didn't take me long to find the Wanderlust Hotel, which was quite respectable by cheap hotel standards. As I waited, I had time to wash the drying blood off me and tend to my healing wounds as well. My cell phone had been damaged in the fall out the window. I needed to call Davis from a payphone to get him my update. Sure enough, there had been another murder on the other side of town. The second victim had their brain removed, just as Jody had predicted. "Please tell me you're on top of this, Marsh," Davis said. "I am," I replied. "I imagine you've heard about what happened in my apartment by now. Our cult friends tried to kill me last night, and I must admit, they put on an admirable effort. So I saw," he said. "I did you a favor and called your people. They're handling the cleanup. Much obliged. I'm laying low at the Wanderlust Hotel. I think this is where they'll strike next. Tonight. Make sure you've got men nearby on standby, but keep them hidden." I want to try and handle this myself first. Are you sure about that? Positive. I'd very much like to meet the man who tried to kill me last night. His associates made a mess of my home and ruined a really nice shirt. I like compensation. Davis tried to hide his laughter. Yeah, all right, Count Priscilla. Me and my men will be on standby. Let's hope you're right about the hotel. I knew I would be. The Wanderlust Hotel had a lovely little Italian restaurant. Even better still was the fact that their restaurant gave me a discreet place where I could watch the parking lot for anyone interested. The red sedan arrived as the sun began to set. I saw 4 men get out. Only one of them was of any interest. He was tall, bulky, and dressed in a black suit with a fedora covering his head. My instincts told me that this was Joshua. The shape of his body implied an inhumanity to him that might have eluded some, but didn't elude me. Just what he was I couldn't say, but I could make an educated guess. Not long after, an SUV dropped off a woman in the parking lot. She was young, mid-20s perhaps, and already looked as if she'd lived a hard life. The baby blue dress she wore that hugged her body and showed off her legs, as well as the way she looked around anxiously as she stopped to smoke before she entered the lobby, told me that she was the soon-to-be victim. Now the only missing piece was Della, and she didn't keep me waiting long. She arrived as the girl was still smoking, and I saw them stopping to talk before going into the lobby together, the way that they stood so close to each other. Told me that the girl thought that Della was her client. It was time to go. I'd paid my bill beforehand, and I left quietly, following them into the lobby, into room 130. They were already inside by the time I made it to the hallway, and as I approached the door, I could already hear the faint sounds of a struggle. Time was short. I broke into a sprint to close the distance. The door was locked, but that didn't pose much of an issue for me. With one powerful kick, I threw it open and was greeted by a sight that sent a chill down my spine like nothing had in a very long time. The prostitute was held down on the bed by 3 stony-faced cultists, each wearing a ceremonial bull head. Della stood over her, an ornate dagger that looked like a horn in her hand, and near the back of the room stood Joshua without his hat. I could see exactly what he was. Though his brutish face was human enough, the file-down horns protruding from his skull confirmed to me that he was at least part minotaur. At his feet sat an unassuming cooler that stank of human flesh as soon as I broke in. They all stopped what they were doing and looked at me, except for the prostitute. She kept on screaming. "You will not stop the divergence, you crude, simple-minded thing. Under the guidance of Yavuz, we shall surpass the herd and grow beyond them. And what exactly will you do with that power?" I asked. My eyes shifted over to Della. "Is killing innocent people worth whatever Yavuz has promised you?" "Innocent," Joshua said, his teeth gritted in rage. "In what context is humanity innocent?" "You. I smell the rotten stink of dead blood in you, vampire. You especially should know the suffering humanity has induced on us. Hunted, hated, and labeled as monsters. At least your kind warrant such a label. But mine did not. Hunted as trophies, our numbers pushed until only a few of us remained. I'll aim to restore the glory of the Minotaur, and with my faithful, we shall make the hunters the haunted. You'll get yourself and your friends here killed," I said, "assuming you don't outright end the world by summoning news. I'm giving you a chance, Joshua. Don't do this. Don't throw away your humanity." Behind Joshua, I saw Della's eyes soften, her grip on the dagger loosened. "Humanity," Joshua scoffed. "And what would your kind have to offer me? I know what you are, vampire." "The International Fey Relations Bureau." He said the name with such contempt. Cowards trying to stave off extinction through politics. Doomed to inevitable failure. There is no cooperation with humanity. There is no alliance to be had. There is no shared future. There is only hunter and prey. I choose to be a hunter, and you are nothing but prey. Kill the girl, my faithful, and I will kill this parasite properly." As he spoke, Joshua shrugged off his suit jacket. His mind was made up. He was looking for a fight, and yet before he could move, Della spoke. "Joshua, wait, what if he's got a point?" He paused and glared at her. "I mean, we don't exactly know for sure what'll happen when we complete the ritual. We've been rushing things already. I mean, maybe we should shop? Joshua asked when we were on the cusp of the divergence. Look, you said it yourself. Yavuz hasn't been contacted since ancient times. We don't know if, before she could say another word, Joshua was on top of her, his meaty fist closed around her throat. He tore the horn knife from her grasp. We so close to divergence, and only now do you experience your cowardice. We will achieve divinity, girl, and if you are not strong enough to do what must be done, then you shall die with the rest. Before I could stop him, Joshua drove the knife into her heart. He cast Della's body aside in the instant before I lunged for him. From the corner of my eye, I saw his cultists scatter. I couldn't tell if they'd sided with Della, or if they were too afraid to step in. As they ran, the prostitute threw herself off the bed and scrambled for the open door. She was gone before anyone could stop her. No, Joshua cried, his eyes fixed on me, burning with rage as he tried to drive the dagger into my throat, but I caught him by the wrist. For a moment I saw a flash of panic in his eyes before I went for his throat. My teeth pierced his flesh as his blood filled my mouth. Joshua tried to scream and push me off. And yes, in terms of raw strength, he was much more powerful than I was. But I was the one with my teeth in his neck. And when he threw me off, I took a nice chunk of flesh with me. Blood spilled down Joshua's front as he grabbed at his fresh wound. Even his massive hand wasn't enough to stop the bleeding. I licked my lips. His blood was savory, rich, and delicious. And even without that, I would have come for him again anyways. Joshua was slashed at me with a dagger. I ripped it out of his hands and tossed it aside before biting into his throat again. His struggles were weaker this time. It wasn't long before they ceased completely. Jody was right. Minotaurs were delicious. With Joshua dead, I stepped back from his corpse, panting heavily. Beside me, I could hear wheezing, rasping breaths, and they grounded me. Della, she lay in a crumpled heap, in a growing pool of her own blood a few feet away. Her eyes were on me, wide and afraid. She was staring down death, and I knew she wouldn't last much longer. She opened her mouth to speak, and I thought I could just barely hear her say one word. My name? Robert. I knelt down by her side, and I gently took her hand. Our eyes met, and I knew that I couldn't watch her die. Not like this. She was flawed and foolish, yes, but I could forgive that. What I was about to do was almost certainly a mistake. But at that moment, I didn't care. It was a mistake I'd gladly make. Davis and his men caught the cultists as they tried to flee the hotel, along with the prostitute. I'm told that despite a significant amount of trauma, the girl will be okay. My employers were kind enough to pay for the repairs to my apartment, and in the time since, my life has mostly returned to normal. Mostly fledgling vampires can be a bit of a handful. There's so much to teach, but Della is adjusting well. I'm not sure if she's forgiven me for the 5 years it's been since I left her behind, but I've got an eternity to make up for it now, and for the first time. I find myself looking forward to that eternity. Romance is something that has never worked out for me before, but right now I feel inclined to try again.